Hello and welcome to the Six Pixels Under podcast. I am NS or Nerd Slayer or Justin, your host. And sorry, for some reason I always feel like I fixed my camera before, but then it gets like messed. But it's probably because my desk moves around. Um, Today there's like honestly so much to go into, and the truth is I really want to talk about Hytale, which is a video that I just finished and should have done in like a couple of days. Uploaded, I mean, so you guys can watch it. But it's like I don't want to spoil it. That's the hard. Honestly, it sounds funny, but that's like a hard part about like, I love what I do. I love my job. I love what I cover, and I want to make an impact. So all of that makes it really hard to not want to talk about this shit. um, but anyway, I think you guys will really enjoy the Hytale episode just because well, obviously it's recent. There's a lot to talk about, and I think its mistakes are a lot more obvious when you watch the story. I think that that's the cool part about the series. Sometimes you don't know if it's gonna be like, wow, you get surprised in the Death of a Game series, like, oh wow, I didn't expect this to come. This is why it failed. This is weird. Like City of Heroes has like a bit of a surprising story. I think personally. But something like Hytale is honestly, it's one of those things where it's like you have the gift of hindsight and a timeline, but that's kind of what the series is. Is like we have hindsight, we have timeline, we have intuition, and suddenly everything looks kind of simple. What's up, Justin, old guy? Or Justan? Is it Justan or Hustan? I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that right. But because we have so much like MMO news also to kind of talk about, and there's some topics that I just want to get spicy with, because like really what this podcast is like Six Pixels Under is not just like something that's supposed to be really official. It kind of started that way, but I think what I kind of realized over time is that like for me, what I really enjoy is interfacing directly with the community, especially because I can kind of be a bit of an asshole if you don't know me. Whether I'm reviewing your game or because I get like messages from developers that are being nice to me, but they're also like, I hope you never talk about my game. I'm just like, I mean, all right, but I get where they're coming from. And then of course, when I get a sponsor like the Fragpunk videos, I'll get people listing on it who are like, can't wait to see this in the series. And I never told you guys. No, maybe I did tell you guys this, but there was actually one time a couple of years ago, maybe a year or two ago, where one of the clients that I did a sponsored video for. I think I told Card this, who's actually sitting in the back right now. Well, in the virtual world, he is sitting in the back, but we're just in Discord chat together. Because we're going to talk about some of these topics, and there's a lot to talk about in the industry in general, the industry that is video game industry, because obviously there's so many other industries we could talk about, especially because Card and I like to talk about many other industries, but video games is what we're going to talk about today. And obviously that also, with virtual worlds, means we're going to talk about social stuff, psychology, things like that, because you can't help but have to also cover some of that stuff. Yeah, so many people, well, for example, we have somebody in the chat. Is it another soulless shill for a game that will die in less than a year? I was really disappointed with your last video. I've literally never seen this person before. Like, so one thing I've always noticed, and Card can feel free to jump in whenever they want, is whenever I have people actually come to the Discord and like talk about a particular sponsor or not liking a particular video, it's pretty much always like pretty well intentioned, like, or maybe it starts like less well intentioned, like maybe it's like a little bit more hostile, but like we end up getting to a point where we realize like sometimes whenever you have misunderstandings with people or you don't know people, all it takes is just getting to know them more. Now, obviously, sometimes that can make you not like them. But I've always found it really interesting, Card, that when it comes to sponsored videos, the only people who pretty much ever complain are the people that I never, ever hear or see talk. Isn't that interesting?
It's a fairly common trope, generally on the internet, of course, people don't like the many sponsors around on YouTube, but they're also not realizing the fact that the sponsors these days are the way that the majority of people on YouTube actually can make some money. And that can come in sponsored ads in front of the video or entirely sponsored videos. So, yeah, it's a cost of doing business. And in the end, if you see it's a sponsored video, you don't have to watch it. So it would be appreciated by the people who make them, because that's how they get paid.
Yeah, and ultimately, it makes me think sometimes the people that do complain about that, what sort of like work experience have you had? Because, for example, like when I worked as a subcontractor in construction for around like 8 years, so about 4 of that was like cost estimation, and the rest was cost estimation and project management. So it was a lot more hands-on the projects and on the ground, not just on a computer screen or theoretically, virtually, whatever. And it's actually a big reason why I love maps and love maps in virtual worlds is because of my previous job made me look at blueprints all day. But whenever we had to, as a subcontractor, work with certain, let's say like a subcontractor, because we were a subcontractor of a subcontractor, what that would mean was sometimes we would inevitably cross paths with a general contract that we didn't like.
Oh,
And
yes.
I still remember one in particular, and actually people in Texas are gonna laugh because they probably know this person, but so there's actually a company, a GC called Bond Construction, and I mean, I don't want to say they're a bad company, but they're just like they hire people that are straight out of college that then get a little bit of experience, and I guess just get really big egos because like they start like bossing you around like crazy. But I remember one time so we were working on a hospital, and this hospital was like it was a wing that was unused. There was no actual like civilian traffic going through it. And so one of my guys was going to the restroom, and at the time the restrooms were all finished and everything, but like to Vaughn policy, they didn't want anyone to even touch those restrooms. I remember I'm sitting there waiting, and some guy like walks up on me, and he's like hulked up, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he has his hard hat on and everything, and I'm like, um, waiting for my friend. He's like, what's he doing? And I was like, I mean, at this point, what am I gonna say? He's gonna come out of this door. It's a restroom, you know what I'm saying? So I was like, let's go in the restroom. He's like, you're not supposed to go in there. And then he like literally, the guy comes out. He's like, hey, and then he sees me, and then he sees the guy. The guy like escorts us out, and he's like, no, now you need to go like to the office. And we had to literally talk to like trailers. Each job site usually has a trailer, which is kind of like where like the big bosses are. We had to go in there and fucking talk to them, and they were like, you're not supposed to use these because they're, they didn't even really give us a reason why. But that's just an example of like, I mean, the truth is that that was a really good contract, and we made like good money on it. But we didn't want to work with fucking bond construction. Are you kidding me?
I mean, you're gonna have all sorts of different people you have to work with. Like, I don't go on site, but for my job, like, we work with companies all over the world. And some of them can be really chill, and others, they're just, you want to tear your hair out, and you still have to deal with it. Even if somebody on the other side is the absolute most wonderful mix of being completely and utterly incompetent at doing whatever they're doing, but also in a position of power where they have a lot of say. So you just got to deal with it. Like, you have to take the bad with the good.
Yeah, and also even like I think when it comes to like ethics and sort of stuff like that, what you often find is that like when you pick apart anybody's job, it's actually pretty easy to get into the ethics of like why things shouldn't be the way they are and why they're unfair. And I mean, I can give you Card knows some of mine from working in construction, and people who know me know some of mine because of the kind of things that I had to work with. So it's like, yeah, I think people know that sometimes, yeah, whenever you work with people, it's not the most ideal situation. And all right.
People or businesses. And like I said, I have some examples, but there's also things like NDAs in place.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Is it's like I guess I could talk about some of my examples, but it's pretty political, so that's why I don't want to talk about it. And
Yeah.
I've said this before. I'm never against talking about politics, but I think that most people are against talking about politics because they're not conditioned to do it. Like they're not used to having discourse in a way where they might be able to disagree with somebody, but kind of see their perspective, agree to disagree, maybe like, reconvene later on after you've like educated yourself more. But I just wanted to say
That's,
something. Oh, go ahead.
that's why we need more politics in virtual worlds again.
No, I totally agree, and I think that that's what I miss so much about old Star Wars and Star Trek, as we've probably talked about before. Is that I mean, I'm talking about Star Wars, the expanded universe, to be clear. It was very political, and Star Trek is very political, and I feel like these kinds of shows, actually, especially sci-fi and tech focused players and watchers and audiences, really kind of motivated them to kind of understand some of these deep concepts. I mean, we talked about this before, but I think Next Generation um, had Q in the first episode, like already talking about morality and gray. Like that's like pretty heavy stuff.
I've always been fairly confronting on that, but I think it comes with the territory, because if you want to progress, you're looking at progressing in many different ways and not just in having fancy, faster than light technology.
Yeah, and also I just want to respond to the chat real quick. It wasn't labeled as a sponsor in any way. It actually was. So I can just say you're an idiot. Because once again, as I've said this before, not only do you have to label videos like that, which is why I don't know if you've ever heard big content creators have come out and said this before too, and I'm a small fry, but even they have to admit that they have to admit it, because actually in U.S. law, and maybe this works differently in other countries. I'm not sure how that works exactly, but in
Yeah, different rules.
yeah, in the US though, like if you are sponsored and you don't disclose it, basically it's like committing fraud. So like you actually can get some serious charges brought against you. It's a crime. So yeah, it's like maybe other countries don't have it. That's why people say that stuff, but that's why I never joke about it because like yeah, just like I wouldn't joke about stealing material in construction because that was also, you know, a crime. You know what I'm saying? It's just weird when people say stuff like that. And also, Madness has a really good perspective on this. One of our common chatters, viewers, longtime watchers, he says, I never get it. He's like, if I'm working in a particular job and somebody's critiquing my job and I think that I'm doing a good enough job and their critique is not well founded, why wouldn't I want to defend my work? I care about my work. I was like,
I mean,
yeah.
quote Marco Pierre White. And when he told himself, he's like, listen, you're being judged by people who know less about food than you do. So why do you care? Critique is good and all, but you need to have a good level of understanding if you want to critique something properly. And
Yeah,
that comes with everything, whether it's very basic or very complicated. Like, oh, this video is not marked as sponsored. Well, if I go to my subscription feed, I hover over that video, the icon, literally says includes paid promotion. Because that's what YouTube asks you to do, demands from you as well. Not even the law, but just YouTube itself as a platform wants you to mark that.
yeah, it's true. And actually, recently, since I'm writing Lost Ark at the moment, what I've noticed with Lost Ark is that it's obviously not the most interesting story from the Western perspective because it came later, kind of failed, so on and so forth. But what I was looking at is that the game, like in reality, was originally tested as far back as like 2015. I'm actually looking at it right now. Um, and like this is actually I'm gonna use this as a segue into the first kind of topic, which is that like recently there was that Microsoft MMO that got canceled, and so anyway, like the point is that this game Lost Ark was already getting played as far back as 2015. It didn't launch in Korea until 19, which is pretty normal, but then it didn't launch in the West until let's see. God damn it! I need to make this thing bigger. Okay, that's what she said. But in February of 2022, so that was like basically 2 years later. Um, you're talking about like 7 years after the game was initially playable. And the reality is, the tough reality is good MMOs and good virtual worlds have to be playable, um, pretty early on in order to kind of have belief in like whatever you're gonna do that's gonna work. At the same time, sometimes these games just take a fuck ton of time. And with this Microsoft, ZeniMax Online virtual world that got canceled, the only thing we know about it, if you're wondering what's come out, was that it was like a looter RPG style game. So maybe like Borderlands Online, like something like that. But I don't know if I think it was with guns, but I can't remember off the top of my head if it was with no, I think it was with guns. From what I was hearing. Anyway, that's all I really know about it. Is those two things. Well, no, I've talked about this before on the podcast, but actually that the fact that this ZeniMax MMO was supposed to be kind of like innovative in a big game. Well, there was recently like a article that came out, and I actually have it here somewhere. Um, Here it is. You've probably seen this one. But it's a future has been stolen from many of us, and our community will never experience an amazing game. Microsoft MMO devs respond to the cancellation of Project Phil Spencer reportedly loved. Um, and yeah, I wanted to talk about this topic just really quickly with like two kind of aspects, which is my first one that I was kind of already covering, which is how long it takes to make these sorts of games. And also like the current corporate structure and understanding level of virtual worlds. And I guess I'll just give that to you and see what your response is to both of those kind of things in the current state of like the virtual world industry, because this is obviously indicative of it in some ways.
It is like the length of time needed for virtual world creation is insane, and it's even longer if you're gonna build a new world, as we personally discussed quite a few times. Like if you have an existing world and lore to build with, you can skip a whole bunch of lore building because that's already done for you. But if you don't, then you also need to do the lore building, and it needs to go in conjunction with, of course, your game design. Now, if you've got existing lore, you need to work with that lore to make it fit within game design. So you're already dealing with some constraints. But overall, you're looking at a time scale in order to get something that is like probably playable at a level where you can start to get some information out of it on a local scale. I think 3 years is probably going to be your minimum, where it's going to be useful. Like you can play bits and bobs before it. And then you're talking like playing with placeholder assets, really basic stuff. So then you need to work more on that internally. And you're probably looking at time scale wise, maybe year 5 nowadays, where you can be like bringing in some external people. Whether that is like, hey, bring in some friends and family, just some random people that you like somewhat know, or maybe you're going to open some close beta testing, and then you're going to be running the long track if you want to do it properly, a long track of slowly increasing the numbers of people that are testing your game, while you're going to be redeveloping, rechanging things around, seeing what people are doing. And also in this time period, you also need to be having a lot of your own people go and look at currently games that are out there that are currently being played and how people are playing those games and what issues they are running into. Because quite often it is not all about what you can do and your issues, but also looking at the issues from your competitors. Because quite often, if you see your competitors are making a certain mistake, you're still in active development at this point in time. This is the moment in time where you can be like, okay, we need to make some changes so that we're not making that same mistake. And also, if you hear people, they're talking about like a certain missing features that they really are desiring, and they're just missing out of these games, it's like, hey, this is your opportunity. People are desiring certain features. This is your time to start including those features. So if you want to do it properly, from start to finish, you're looking at probably a time scale that easily can go up to 8 years. So from initial concepting to launching a game. And for an even bigger project, that can even be 10 years. Because keep in mind that initial, a lot of people think it's a lot of time, but that initial period, you're working on that project with very few people. Because you're just building out things, you're checking out the lore, you're forming up rule sets, and you're discussing what you actually want to make. That stuff takes a lot of time as well.
Yeah, in fact, someone in chat was talking about they didn't think it would be very good. Obviously, we don't know anything about it, but what I will say is that there's of course a strong chance of that. And I think that recent game development has been much better. Like people can be very doom and gloom about like the virtual world industry, but honestly, I think like across the um, like across the way, like probably through 6 or 7 genres, they're having pretty good times at the moment. Like um, RPGs are doing still pretty well. Action RPGs are doing well. RTSs are definitely not doing well, but survival games are. Um,
Rifle games are big, RPGs are big. Like people still like to play online games. People still like to play games that are with stories and stuff like that. RTS, like a lot of people tend to forget, but it's never been uber mainstream sort of a thing. Like it was big in early days, but it's also technological limitations.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
agreed.
RTS was easier to make than certain other games, so that naturally came. But the more direct control you have, for the majority of people, they are far more interested in playing a certain character, no matter what that character is, than to be playing the person that runs behind the scenes that gives commands. That's just not a role that a lot of people are as interested in.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to frame it, and that kind of is a bit of a segue into another like still related to virtual worlds here that I wanted to talk about, which is like when you mention how having an existing IP is so much easier. I think people really downplay that. Like, people will constantly talk about, oh, Pokemon can do whatever they want. In reality, obviously, they can make a lot of mistakes and get away with like subpar aspects. But what people also don't credit them for is they can do that because they built their world. So, in a sense, the fact that they built their world, it allows them to kind of be lazy in certain ways without having to interject that much story or with getting away without having to add certain aspects that other people expect. The problem with things
I
like,
don't.
Temtem, to bring it back to Temtem, is that no one has any emotional connection to any of that. And you're trying to create that from thin air without any idea of how much or how important that was, you know?
We discussed earlier, like one of the best, well not best, like but easily at least one of the better MMO launches of something that was more of their own making was with the Secret World. They had this whole process leading up to launch with mini games and games that were played through social media and stuff like that in order to just start building it up high, but also getting people involved with the different factions. And through that, of course, watching stuff, learning stuff, lore, also these video games. So they were starting to build up all of this work, which is something that you have to do if you make your own universe. You need to introduce that universe, you need to give people a reason to care. And just being like, here's my amazing universe, and you're going to start in this MMO, you're literally playing with both hands tied behind your back and probably a steel ball and chain around one of your feet. That's how much of a difference it makes. Versus if I'm going to make a new Star Wars MMO, I've got the entire universe laid out for me. All I need to do at that point in time is pick a time somewhere in Star Wars lore history and be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. I don't have to develop classes, they're already there. The ship design is already very much laid out, all of the lore, the stories, people know the locations. I don't have to do anything for that anymore. That already has been done for me over decades of time through so many different forms of media that it's impossible to compete with if I'm going to be starting fresh.
Great point
Even
by,
if I would,
sorry to interrupt, great point by
yeah,
YKW in chat, if you saw. They said, WoW had Warcraft, VSO had Elder
yep.
Scrolls, FF14 had Final Fantasy, MMORPGs suck at storytelling and world building and making the player care about them. But anyway, sorry, continue.
I mean, I would say that's they. most of them really suck at storytelling. That is thing. But world building they can do if you do it properly. But it is a very difficult thing to do. And it's even harder to do. Like we said, we just discussed that people like to be connected very much with their character in this world. And that's harder to do when you are in a larger environment versus a more condensed, constrained environment. Which is one of the reasons why we've discussed as well, is like if you're going to launch your own virtual world in your own universe, you have to build that universe up first. So you need to give people other forms of media and probably likely even a single player game just to get them involved in that universe.
Yeah, and even just like something that also has to happen is I think part of the problem is, and maybe you would agree, is like back in the day, we used to excuse so much of this stuff. Ironically, I've talked about this before, but I've met the developers for SWOTOR, which was just referenced in chat. And ironically, also in this chat, as we've mentioned before, maybe people know that Card and I probably have played more SWOTOR than almost anybody in chat.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, combined, the amount we could forget the amounts, that people know. um, Needless to say, that SWOTOR and lesser Secret World for me, you probably know more about it than I do. But still, like these narrative focused games have always caught my eye and caught our eye. And before I kind of explain more of that, I want to kind of get the funny or trolling part out of the way, which is like we kind of have to stop like coddling creators. So something that I had like a chat with someone about recently, and I kind of could see where they were coming from, but they were saying like, yeah, where you were saying like projects, are just about failure or success. My argument is that art can change that, and I agree. The problem is that when art gets too far away from being graded in some sort of way or understood as quality, I do think there's some big issues there. And part of what I'm saying, and you can respond after I'm done, is like, we grew up with this, playing these RPGs and MMORPGs. And back in the day, I'm sure you remember these talks as well. People would always say, oh, it's MMO storytellings suck, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. And that was it. It was just like, you know what I'm saying? That there was no more like thought, given to it. And so many MMORPGs had bad story. And worse, the player base was okay with it. And I never understood that as a big, RPG gamer growing up. I've told people before, Neverwinter Nights is probably my favorite RPG, and followed by like KOTOR 2 and, a couple other ones that I'm sure people like as well, but like Dragon Age Origins. But anyway, like Mass Effect. Anyway, the classics.
Mass Effect was such a good MMO.
But yeah, like, but imagine like these games with MMOs, you would have probably the same expectation of at least some level of storytelling. Now you might say, yeah, but that's just like the death, or that's the curse of expectation. I would argue, no, that's just, these are good RPGs, and you would have an expectation that they would be believable in good RPGs when they're online. And like, most of them just aren't.
No, most of them aren't. And I will say like this, like a lot of it is bad, but in many MMOs you will find some quest lines in there that are just absolutely fucking amazing. They're out there.
Agreed.
And I think that's where your focus should also be if you want to tell story in an MMO. Is you need to have your world story that is something that happens and that people are, you partake in it simply because you were in this world and you may do certain things that may contribute to this overall world story. But where your focus wants to be for like your individual interactions is to be in those quest lines. You can have so many quest lines in a MMO setting because you got a giant world, so you can put quests all over the place. And if you're just getting a good group of writers under good leadership, as YK also noticed here, is like you need good direction. If you get those writers in there, it's just like, hey, if you have an idea for what you think would make a great storyline, and for we can do in the quest, like go ahead and write it. We can put these things in there. And by doing enough of that, and by also making it so that, because it's not a problem MMOs have, they're tailoring their, the good old experience gain. You have to go through all of these quests in order to, roughly level up in pace with the world. If I'm just telling you, it's like, hey, at any moment in time, you have a choice between 2 to 5 or 6 quests that you can take, and that's each one of those is good enough. People can make their own storyline. They can follow maybe a certain direction and go down certain pathways where you go from one quest to another, where somebody's like, well, you've been really helpful for me, and I heard something over there, da da da. So you can actually string together a quest chain, and people can have their own experience going through that world. So you can do a lot of storytelling in there. The problem is when you tell that to the bean counters, they will be like, okay, but then you're going to be making a lot of work that not everybody is going to play, so it's not going to have any value, because they don't understand that if it's good enough, people actually will come back and still play those quests later on.
Yeah, and you hit a really good nail. As I've talked to a lot of developers, including developers on virtual worlds, about this, and that's something that they've actually covered or like remarked about to me, and including even when I spoke to Chris Avalon, is like the difficulty with making kind of certain more like specific or hidden content is that that is very much the argument that the bean counters make, which is that like they want content to all be consumed, like all of it. Like they don't want there to be content that's ever left on the table, right? Um, and
And
I think
if
that's
it's
sorry.
good,
Oh, go ahead.
if it's good enough in current day and age, what actually happens is that people will find about it and it will come online. Content creators will also find out about it, hear about it, experience it. They will share it with people. It's like, hey, this quest line is actually bloody amazing. You have to go and do this, or we found this secret. Go ahead, try and find it as their overwhelm. It's like, yes, there is a downside in a way that you take away some of the exploration experience from people, but that's the reality of the times that we live in. But on the other hand, you should be able to tell your bean counters nowadays, it's like, hey, if we make the things that are good enough, people will find out about it over time, and it will be spread over time throughout the internet, and people will keep coming back to play that stuff. Because
Yeah,
if somebody's like, hey, I'm max level, I've done some of the stuff, I'm kind of bored, they go on YouTube and they're looking up some stuff, and then their content creators like, hey, I found this amazing quest line over there, and this person is like, I never seen that quest line. Boom, you got them for another 8 hours.
yeah, and even just like that is more of how world storytelling would feel, and you would experience it. Really, would be like piece by piece and not just all at one time. And I think that that's kind of like we had this conversation last week, which is I mean Dota mentioned uh SWOTOR, which is actually like we've talked about this previously, or like we talked about previously. With SWOTOR, like Star Wars The Old Republic was able to launch and basically beat every single virtual world storytelling wise. And like, while many of you might say, yeah, they had 200 million plus and also three goated storytellers, you're right. That's true. They did. They had three really good storytellers. One, who's written a bunch of books and written the other favorite games that I mentioned, right? Like Mass Effect 1, Drew Karpyshyn. They had so many of these talented writers. The guy that wrote Imperial Agent, and many more. And so like they really were able to just show up and just beat everybody in that sort of sense. And the reason why it was, sort of remarkable and also kind of like sad in a sense is that since then, nobody's even come close still. Like, and I think the reason they don't is like we talked about, SWOTOR isn't just about class story. I know people talk about that part a lot, and I understand why it's the big part of the game. But like you and I understand, the way the game is actually set up is to each character. The reason why people like us like to play almost every you've played every single storyline. I haven't. I won't play the Jedi Counselor and the troopers just because they're seem really boring to me when I've like gotten them to like level 20, which is usually like the point that I expect things to get a little bit more exciting. But anyway, like the reason why so many of us love to play all these storylines, besides just loving Star Wars and just loving online RPGs, is actually because the world story develops differently and more as you play different characters. A lot of people don't know that because they didn't play enough of SWTOR. But hey,
They
you wanna
all
explain that?
interact. All of the storylines interact with each other. So if you go through them and each additional storyline that you play, you start to realize that there are elements in there that are a direct consequence, or that or that actually were the influence of things that you did in a other storyline. So when you play through more and more of these storylines, you start to see that it's actually 8 storylines that are all part of one centralized story that led to the final conclusion, so to speak, where in the end, of course, you go from there into Macab and then finally into Rathan's storyline, because that's the conclusion of what was the SWTOR overall story arc. And that's also where you know as well and I know as well, like that's where they ran out of funding, Steam, whatever it was, and they were like, okay, what do we do next? Because they had 8 branches which they all truncated at the end, because that's what you have to do, which is something a lot of people don't understand with storytelling a lot of time in video games, is that people want choice, which is good, but you can only have so many branches at any time, and you have to truncate those branches frequently in order to keep the workload manageable. So they had it all truncated again, and they just did not have the funding or the idea on how to branch it out again at that point in time.
Yeah, and even like we've also talked about, I think another part is that they didn't. Fuck, trying to add text. They didn't really fully commit to the idea. So it kind of feels like more like Dark Souls lore or story, where it's like in the background. Which is kind of a bit of a shame because I think people don't credit BioWare and that team with essentially coming up with something that, again, still nobody has really done, which is connected individual class stories to a world story that also ends up then furthering the story overall. That's actually a great idea. Now, obviously, many of you have either seen my video on SWTOR, or you probably know why the game is, the way it is. But yeah, essentially, SWTOR had its issues, but it was not really anything to do with the game's storytelling, right? Like that's why so many of us, including me and Card, actually recommend the game to people story-wise. Like that's one thing that people tried to smear me on with in the SWTOR community after I put my video out, is they tried to say like, oh, I'm just a hater. And in reality, it's like I've probably recommended more people to that game than the people that think that I'm a hater. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about hundreds of people that I've recommended.
Anybody who hasn't played SWTOR, it is like literally the case. Go and play it. Go play those class storylines. Because individually, like okay, there's some of them are not as good, but overall, it's just a really good story experience, and it comes at these days at a great cost of absolutely nothing. So why wouldn't you? If you're like, I don't know what to play, I want to have something to do with story. There you go. You can ignore all the other people that are in the world because that doesn't matter anymore. So yeah, you can just go and play 8 single-player stories in an MMO.
Well, sort of, Dota. It's more like they were already so for many years, and I know because I was a part of LucasArts forums and Obsidian forums as a well, I kind of was like a community moderator on Obsidian's forums, but I was just like a shit poster on LucasArts forums. But it was because I was obsessed with KOTOR, and so whenever I was done with the second game, many of us would create threads and theories about the third game, and we knew that they were like cooking something about it because they would kind of remark about it every now and then. So maybe what you're referencing is that like BioWare or Obsidian obviously wanted to make a third game. I mean, who wouldn't? Like KOTOR is such a freaking cool like universe, and it's probably the darkest Star Wars world besides like Andor recently. Like, kind of introducing more of the darkness back into the Star Wars universe, and not the fucking cheesy like cast lightning shit, but like actually like dark themes and concepts of like I mean really like Andor is a concept of colonization, concept of freedom fighters, rebellions. Like it's a lot of more complex themes than Star Wars is usually comfortable with covering. But yeah, so they wanted to make a KOTOR game, but what you're probably referencing is that in an infamous interview slash famous interview, Daniel Erickson, believe it was Daniel Erickson, when they were asking him about, hey, like, do you want to make KOTOR 3? He was like, well, we want SWOTOR to be like KOTOR 3 for, no, it was James Olin that said it. KOTOR 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And
Yeah.
obviously, I know you remember that because we've talked about it before. That ended up obviously really hurting them. And just quickly to hop off of SWOTOR, because people often wonder why it didn't do so well. Maybe seeing it as like EA trying to make it WoW Star Wars, as you said, Dota, could be a part of the problem. But really, I think like, and Hard and I have talked about this at length, is it was a game with an identity crisis, right? Like
Yep.
since the very beginning, they always talked about an early, and I was following the game for 5 years before it ever came out, and a part of the alpha testing, as I've talked about before. They always talked about the game being big and massive. They never showed us anything that was big and massive except for Ilum, and that didn't even work. So, like, you got to think from people like me and Card's perspective. We were a part of all of that, so we know that the game didn't function massively. It wasn't just like, oh, you're just saying that because you're being like technical and being mean to SWOTOR. It's like, no, the game literally had to downsize everything because it wasn't working.
Good old hero engine.
Yeah, and partly because as we joke about before, the Hero Engine sales rep was the greatest sales rep ever, apparently, because he duped ZeniMax for ESO and duped that other game, I forgot the name of it, Repopulation Online, and apparently duped SWOTOR. It's like, how on earth did they sell that to everybody when they obviously didn't really have solutions with it? But anyway, that was more so the issue with the game, was its technical limitations. Now think for a second, everyone, theoretically. Take the idea of SWOTOR and put it in this like high production, looks really good, has a great soundtrack, Japanese style. And I'm not saying it has to be styled like Japanese like game design, but I'm saying like with that approach of like high production, good graphics, that game would be fucking amazing. Because it would be just everything SWOTOR is but better, right? And that's the argument I made in the video.
They had it made just like an MMORPG instead of the MMO side of things. Just leaned into it being smaller form,
Yep.
smaller focus. It would have done really well. And Star Wars itself as a universe leans itself extraordinarily well to it, because a lot of the time what we see with Star Wars is solos or small groups of people achieving big things. So it is also very lore accurate.
Yeah.
And
And
people, if like if people know a universe for a certain setting, if you're gonna give them that universe, but you change that settings field to them, it doesn't feel like the same universe.
exactly. And sorry, I was just reacting to chat, since I'm, as you guys know, notoriously horrible at that. What's up, STD? I wanted to say, STD said, how hard is slightly changing the dungeon and rage each time when you enter? It would be nice to have something like Hades storytelling. Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like when you make it more, as we've talked about in other chats before behind closed doors, when you make a game more like MMORPG, that gamifies it more. While that might make it more negative in some aspects, honestly, a lot of that stuff can be minimized, and when it's not minimized, it doesn't matter, because the whole strength of that genre and type of game is the fact that it is compartmentalized. It's very sectional. There's channels. You can change channels to play with your friends in many of these games, right? Like there's often instances like SWOTOR had. None of this would have mattered to anybody if the game was sold as a cooperative online RPG, which is kind of what Card and I are talking about, because all of us would have understood this is what we got ourselves into. The problem is the reason why the game had such a big drop in population is because people realized this is a game being sold as a subscription-based game with no possible way of coming up with the production required in order to keep us around, unless we're just going to have good faith, like Final Fantasy 14 players. And yeah, there's nothing else to do in the game besides the story. And the sad truth is that for some fucking reason, as you and I have talked about at length, is they never came out with more class story. I don't know why.
Simply because they did not have the success, so they did not get the budget to do it. That's a big one. But I want to go on that topic of changing a dungeon or raid each time you enter, it is something you could do, but you can only do it at the start when you develop the game. When you're going to be like, hey, this is going to be a feature.
Hmm.
This is how our dungeons and raids are going to work. Because if you put it in later on, people are going to be used to the traditional style of dungeons and raids. And PvE players, a large portion of the skill in doing really well in high difficulty PvE content is by memorizing encounters to a T. So people are really used to knowing exactly what to do, what to expect. They know the timings, they know everything. So if you're going to be changing that, and you make this a later edition, so people already are used from this in many other games, and then you're changing it in your game, you're going to absolutely piss off your audience. Now, if you make it a feature of your game, you say at launch, it's like, hey, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to keep these things fresh, and maybe also work with like some survival game mechanics and rotating loot tables and stuff like that.
Look at
People
RuneScape.
can actually like it
Yeah.
because, hey, I have something that is slightly different, and the skill set of completing this content is now different as well because it's no longer about memorizing every detail, but it's more about being able to react to certain things on time in a correct manner.
Yeah, really, in
So
the
it can
sense that's an
definitely
unfair
work.
part about old school RuneScape is people don't give it enough credit because it does all the things that you say. It actually modernizes itself a lot with its format. There's so many different ways to play the same game, and yet it also has, like we talk about, many times, a wilderness, which is dangerous, and everyone knows about it. And the only people that complain about it are basically little kids that, got tricked into going there, like me. um, but you know what I'm saying? Like, so really, like, I think people have this kind of staunch view of like, well, MMORPGs work this way and MMORPGs work this way. And even if they don't understand the differences in these like acronyms or if these games are that different, they treat them like they can't do the same things. When it's like, I've talked about with Raph and many other people before. Raph Koster, of course, the creator of Galaxies and Ultima Online, and recently Stars Reach, is that like Sandbox was never meant to be one style of game. Theme Park was never meant to be one style of game. So SWTOR already failed on that front in a sense, right? Because there's almost no sandbox content in the game, right?
Yep.
And so the fact
I
that
mean,
they made themselves so theme park, they backed themselves into a corner.
you want to do it for lore, the voiceover here in Dungeons. I know some people like it, but the reality is that most people, like the way they play Dungeons, it is to go through it for the challenge and the loot. So if you put story in there, a lot of people just will not care for it. So you need to, like, that's one of those things. Like
No,
I
I
would
agree.
personally
It's like
like
it's
it a
like a
lot.
competition, right? Isn't it? Like dungeons are like a
Yeah.
competition. Who wants to have storytelling during their competition? Like nobody does. They just want to get the competition over with. You win, boom. Okay, there's your story. You know?
You want your dungeon stories, like they need to be exposés, like in through the setting and through the enemies in dungeon. That's how you're gonna be telling story in a dungeon. But having voiceovers and talking, like that's one of the things that actually also failed with SWTOR, is they have all of this talking and menu conversations in the dungeons, which is like fun for one or two times seeing the different outcomes. But after you've done that, you have been through it, and even if you're gonna change it slightly, at some point you're just like, I'm here to get experience, to get loot or whatever.
Yep.
And a lot of people are just gonna be like, yeah, skip, 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 skip. And if
Yep.
somebody's not skipping, people will just leave
Or
because it
worse,
takes too
like I
much
told you
time.
in Final Fantasy 14, people can actually still complete the fucking trial or raid as you're in the cutscene. That's happened to me multiple times. Where I'm watching the story and everyone else in my party already has done it, I guess. And so they just beat the boss. And one time I was watching the story and it was one of those like open like engine cinematics, so it didn't like transport me anywhere. And I actually saw the boss die during the cinematic. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, how do people
Wait, the
like are
time.
okay with this? I don't get this.
That's where I think the issue comes into play, where you have to understand where you can do your storytelling and how you can do your storytelling in different sort of settings. So I can do storytelling in a PvP battleground. I can do storytelling with that, but I cannot do it through a conversation tree. But I can do it by the setting and by the sound and by the stage and audience, all of that kind of stuff. I can use that for storytelling. It is just not storytelling as in I'm reading or hearing somebody tell me a story. And that's one of those elements where you gotta go, okay, how do I tell story with all of these different elements that I have in my world? And each of those elements is gonna tell story in its own way. And if you do it well, it's gonna be very smooth, very easy to go through. And even people who don't pay a lot of attention will still start to realize the world that they are inhabiting.
Yeah, and actually Dota made a really good point here, which you and I know very well, as we played a lot of WoW, including the classic version of it, which is that the dungeons should be integrated already into the story. I think that's part of
Yep.
actually kind of what Card is arguing here, because that's the problem in SWTOR is in SWTOR, you get a quest that sends you to an NPC, that NPC then sends you into the dungeon. Am I right? Like there's no more expose. That's pretty much
Some
always
of
how it
them
works.
some of them had that, but
And
then
some
you
don't
also
even.
come some don't, but you also come with the issue where actually like a looking for group system where it just drops you into random dungeons is
You're right.
actually an issue.
You're right. Yeah, I see what you're
Because if
saying.
I'm gonna put my dungeons as a conclusion to a storyline, then I should almost make access to the dungeon, like good old classic WoW with raids and stuff like that. It's like, hey, you want to get in here, you need to do something first.
Yeah, or level
So if you want to
scaling
do
it.
this dungeon, so if you want to do this dungeon, you need to have completed a storyline that belongs to that region in which the dungeon is located.
Yeah, no, you're right. And yeah, so SWTOR made some kind of dumb mistakes there in a funny sense, because it's like they could have just learned from WoW and been like, let's actually integrate the story more. So for example, when you're doing a dungeon, or a flashpoint as they're called, there is like story aspects that you have to uncover. And that happens in WoW. Like as you guys remember, one of my favorite dungeons ever is it Blackfire Depths? Excuse me. The one where basically there's like 4 or 5 dwarfs in there and like 6 or 7 different storylines you have to
Yeah.
do. One of them you have to escort like the princess. Everyone remembers that one. Then there's the one where
Oh
you have to
yeah.
like defend the princess at the very end part against a horde of monsters. Then there's the one where you have to like go actually grab this like secret ring, and like there's like literally they basically built a zone into a dungeon. I think that
That's,
was genius.
yeah. And nowadays they have split it up into three portions for their, like Dota here puts it, for the queue simulator,
Which is
which is
butchers it.
fair.
Yeah, I understand
Yeah,
it, but it
butchers
butchers
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like everything has been like if you make something like this and like everything has been made to be optimized to please that whole idea of getting through stuff as quickly as possible. And I think that's one of those elements where if you want to make a good virtual world, you literally have to just tell your audience it's like, well, that's not how the world works. Because the world itself doesn't work like that. Like if you want to get something, generally you won't get it very quickly unless you're going to do things that are not proper. Let's call it that. So slowing things down while making sure it's still enjoyable is actually completely fine. As long as things are rewarding to do, it is okay. But
Yeah.
if you make your stuff all about I need to do this dungeon 10 times in order to have a chance to get blah,
Hmm.
which is I need for this, then what are people going to do? They're just going to spam that bloody dungeon until they get that one item. And they're like, I need to do this fast because, hey, time is money.
Or even how we talked about recently, which is why I'm smiling, is like about Red Dead Redemption 2. Is like I told you that's kind of my problem with the game as an RPG and a sim in a sense, is that they have me sitting there doing, as I joked about with my cousin last night, even the most boring stuff that even farmers and cowboys didn't want to do back then and still today. So like they'll have you do stuff like that in the game, and it's just like, that people don't even find this really that fun. Like even like when it was like modern, like And I think that that shows sometimes people have a misunderstanding of what makes certain aspects or concepts of a story or world fun. And, Dota mentioned this earlier, but I want to comment on it before I forget. They said something along the lines of, wasn't the game more group focused? I won't say it was more group focused at first, but in a sense that it was. SWTOR was, rather. And the reason it was, as you remember, Card, was because the game was actually fairly challenging. What ended up happening, and I was there, a part of the testing process. First off, the biggest, sin that ever happened in the testing process is that they promised us to get in-game characters and gave it to us like for 1 day. So we never got to test the in-game. That's when we knew something was up then. but but before that, which was a big bomb I forgot to drop. I think I mentioned it slightly, but I should have focused more on it in the video. The other thing was they kept getting feedback from players complaining that, oh, I'm level 43 and my quest is level 46. Why can't I beat the boss? And I know, sounds very dumb, but as Card remembers, that kept happening so much to where because EA BioWare, it was EA BioWare at the time, EA contracted another company to handle the feedback. Another company that had fucking no idea what this game was and no idea what virtual worlds were. So they were taking all this feedback in and spitting it back. And so they were spitting this feedback back that apparently the game was just too hard and that nobody was going to like it. And so, yeah, during open beta, that's when I noticed it. I don't know if you remember, Card. They essentially trivialized the game. It went from being like you actually had to like be
Then
careful with certain mob groups, especially like orange mobs, or like if it was a boss that had like the little like circle thing around it, like you had to be careful. You might have to use a med kit or use all your like abilities properly, stun them, use your CCs, and then suddenly you could just run around and just face roll.
it was not even like that direct because there have been multiple changes
Mm,
that made it easier each and every time. But yeah, like I remember early on, it's like with some classes you were not getting a healing companion until a bit later on into the game, and then it was quite a bit more tricky, which I also think is a balancing issue, but
agreed.
that's a separate item.
Agreed.
But yeah, it was fairly tricky. You had to be careful, and then slowly things are getting easier to where the point now is like my healing companion. I'm just oh, I'm walking here. There are mobs, and my healing companion can just kill them all. Like it's so trivialized for most of it that you just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And to some people, like, hey, that is fun. But I think the problem there is because they also introduce level scaling. So you get downscaled to a certain level when you go to lower tier planets, which personally I think that I am big opposing of because one of the goals like of power fantasy is like when I'm increasing in power, if I return to this world which is low tier trash mobs, I literally if I'm coming back there and I'm like my Sith Inquisitor and I need to go on Hatta and there's like a couple of absolute bottom tier gangsters there because if you're anything good, you would not be on Hatta in some small town, and they would attack me. I should just be able to just wave my hand and watch them fly off into the stratosphere because they should be no opposition there. But if I go to a place where things, where I find all the Jedi's to fight or highly experienced bounty hunters, that should provide me with a proper challenge. Give me that sense of danger there. But in these other places, you can let me feel that sense of overwhelming power because I have a shit ton of power as well. You
Yep.
can give me both.
Yeah, and like they could have even handled it in some ways, like, during the Sith Warrior storyline when you get beat up by your master without spoiling anything. They could have made that a gameplay scene that you just get smacked. And that could have also been an important lesson to have you like,
Yep.
sort of learn the difficulty of the game. But something I wanted to mention too is the sadness about the game being easy and why, like, even though I understand that people love power fantasies and online RPGs, that's a big reason why they're successful and what they are. Sometimes they don't necessarily make sense. And like, for example, if you're trying to sell a villain in the very beginning, which happens in the Korriban scenes, and then I can just beat him with my hands behind my back, like the storytelling doesn't make any sense anymore. So it's not just like me complaining because the game's easy. It's complaining because the story doesn't make sense. Because why can I
Yep.
smack my overseer with no effort? when I just fucking landed last week. You know what I'm saying? Like, and yes, I know everyone in chat might troll and say what I like to say to people when they get overly serious about Star Wars, which is just the Force. But we also all know, yeah, we all know that that's a cop out because you can just say that for any excuse in the Star Wars universe, really. It's why Leia flew around in space, for example. It was the Force.
Like, if we're gonna go that path, I think we're going to need a podcast that lasts at least 24 hours
Well, I
just to
actually
get
want to,
started.
yeah, well, before that, I want to actually push into this next, yeah, Team
Yeah.
Rocket enemies. That's a great way to put it, Luke B. This next little topic, which is it me? This guy writes, or girl, is it me? Or nowadays MMO players hate it when the game pushes them to cooperate with other players. And I'll go first, and I've talked about this before. let me take this from the steelman position first. So that means that I'm gonna take this position and give it the best possible like argument and response I can give it. So the steelman response to this is that the answer is some of these games are bad at actually making you want to work with other people. And worse, they might make you feel like it just highlights things you don't like about yourself or don't like about, aspects of socialization. So sometimes I actually think that it's kind of more of the game's fault and the environment's fault that the socialization and this kind of attitude has been supported so much. And so that's me kind of like trying to give them as much, understanding as I possibly can. Now, my next perspective, as this person writes for examples for people wondering, is give me solo dungeons. Please remove those guilds and alliances. They cut me from content. Players keep killing me 3 versus 1. It's not fair. Why can't I do this solo? What do you mean I have to join a guild to be able to do this? That was some of the examples they gave, which are, honestly, all pretty good examples. Now let's kind of like dive into like the idea of like a virtual world, like, and from like really where it starts, right? Which is that these games have always been built around human nature. And what is human nature? Human nature is socialization, working together and working against each other, and having shared goals and the desire to, obtain something great, which obviously depends on the world and the person and so on and so forth. That's kind of like where virtual worlds started. As you know, Card, many people think that all virtual worlds back in the day, in MUD form, multi-user dungeon form, like the early, online RPG game form of it, people think that this genre was very like combat focused, when in reality, there was like 9 subgenres, and like the concept of like WoW or Diablo and the power vertical concept was actually like a smaller subset of the MUDs. There were a bunch of other ones. There were some that had no combat at all. There were some that were just like a VR chat room, but without the VR, obviously just a chat room. But you were characters. There was many different types of game, and Ref made it a point to make that point to me. So what happened over time, as you can probably intuit, especially if you follow the whole like timeline, is that people like the Gower brothers, the guys behind RuneScape, or people like the creators of EverQuest, like Brad McQuaid, and obviously many that went on, like Rob Pardo, to create WoW and many more. These people all were playing a particular kind of MUD that they liked a lot. And, Deku MUD, as it's often called, was like a very much like power fantasy. You get more powerful and you get more, power. That was how the game functioned. That became super popular, especially online, and obviously blew up in popularity. So over time, naturally, people gravitated towards this kind of game. Now the thing is that that kind of game is actually inherently teamwork based, and that's because it has to be. It's essentially about adventurers, right? Which is the concept of D&D, banding together to overcome threats. So you might say, yeah, but some of these games you can play solo, so on and so forth. Some of that comes from the fact that these games were, essentially pioneers. So once you got good enough at them, you could play them by yourself. That was the case with Ragnarok Online, for example. All veteran players of that game play solo, even though it's a team-focused game. So that, what I'm saying is it's a bit more complicated than just saying, oh, it's a team focused game or it's not. More so, what we're trying to get at here is like where people start to hate the concept of having to work together is when it reveals something about yourself. So, say, for example, if you don't have the time to actually find quality teammates, that's a legit reason to feel frustrated. But sadly, not having the time and then somehow like putting in less time will never overcome that solution. How developers, as you know, Card, have tried to overcome this is group finders. But what I guess I'll ask you, what are the quality of group finders and finding the right teammates?
Depending on the type of content that you're going to have, it's steamroll easy content, and of course it's going to work absolutely perfectly
Exactly.
because you don't need to think about it. You just press three buttons, walk forwards, shoot an ability, and you have completed your dungeon. Congratulations, here's your token of reward. Please go and do it again. So for that, it will work brilliantly. But when things get more difficult, then no, it's not going to work well. And as some people mentioned, it's like, yeah, coming up with people and maybe they're not as good. And this is where, human teamwork comes into play. If you actually go ahead and remove those random people out there and you actually targeted are looking for people, banding together in something, I don't know, maybe called a guild, and you will start to notice as people, it's like, hey, certain people are good at certain things. Some people are really good healers, others are good tanks, others are good DPS, another one who's just like, hey, I'm not that great in the combat side of things, but I really like me to do the crafting and all of those things. So they're just doing crafting all of the gear that you need. You start to work together, play around with strengths and weaknesses, and you train each other to become better at the game. So, hey, we failed at this dungeon. What happened? Well, the healer was like, it's like, hell, I told you guys, this boss fight is really hard. I need 30 seconds in order for my cooldowns to reset from the previous mob fight before we attack the boss. We learned something. It is this process of working together that actually makes things interesting, more fun, more engaging, and allows you to do all this harder content. But if I just come in that same environment with a bunch of random people, they don't care. Because that's the first thing you have to understand. You as a person do not really care about a random stranger on the street. You may not think that's the case, but in reality that is the case.
And in
Believe me,
reality,
most of
that's
you,
also fairly normal. That also
yeah,
surprises a lot of people.
because it is normal. Like human social bonds are primarily oriented around a extended family group. That's generally how far we go. That's how far we deeply care about people. Outside of that, it becomes less, 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 and less the further out we go. So if I'm being joined up with a random person over the internet, I don't know them at all. So that's the first barrier for me to wanting to give a damn about this person. I don't know who they are. Secondly, because of how these games work and how many people are put into this pool of this group finder, there's a really, really high chance I will never see that person ever again. So I already don't really care about them because I don't know them, but now I'm gonna care even less about them because the chances of me ever encountering this person again is so low that for me to put energy into actually making this person better or to make a connection with this person is not gonna give me any payoff. But before we had a group finder and we were on our own server, what would happen if you were being an asshole, your name would go around. But if you're really helpful, your name would also go around. In vanilla WoW, when I was playing, for example, my name went around as a person who would gladly boost people through the dead mines. It was something that I just did a whole lot of time. I just did it for tips, so no fee required, but if you had something you wanted to give me, I was happy to take it. My name went around for that. And you may think like, well, what does that matter? Well, later on, and this was during the Burning Crusade era, I was walking around with my hunter in blues and greens, and I get a random message, a DM message. And he's like, hey, would you mind joining a raid with us? I remember you from boosting me through the dead mines. You're a really good person. our hunter quit, we need a hunter, we need to go. And I replied, well, I got blues and greens, and they were like, it doesn't matter. I know that you're a good person, you will try to do your best.
Yeah.
Suddenly, that investment I made paid off a year down the line. But when I have that random person and a group finder, the chances of that happening are effectively zero.
And so there's actually another point someone makes in the comments here. They say, well, first, someone in our chat said, it's about expectations, and you're right that you have to set them from the very beginning.
Yep.
The problem is that many
Absolutely.
developers end up backing off after they get a lot of criticism because they're not sure sometimes how much something could end up damaging their game. And like for SWTOR, I'm sure they thought just making it easier would make the game better. The problem is that the reason why they lost so many players so quickly is because we all beat the game so easily. And that was another part of the problem. They could have easily added another 10 hours of content where we had to level up and do like the side stuff. Instead, we could just go through main story and that's it. And you could just beat the game. And,
Yep.
There's obviously many more examples like that. But like, another thing too is that it's never to say that like Group Finder as a concept is inherently bad. We've talked about this before. There are certain games, and maybe even games that don't even necessarily lean towards that type of content, that should probably have aspects like that. Like one thing I've been a believer in is like if you pay with a token or it's like a particular type of like entry fee, maybe that's a group finder if you're trying to get people into something quickly. Or if you're trying to get them into something where it's not really about giving them a challenge as much as it's about showing them something fun or giving them a fun experience. There's instances in which it makes sense, but the problem is that sometimes people don't get it, that you can't just make it for your solo experience, because what ends up happening is, like here in chat, someone says, oh, why can't I just do the dungeon solo? It's because then someone has to design it for you to do it solo. And if they design it that way, that means they're taking other resources away, that they could be helping more people enjoy the content. So in a sense, when you want more solo dungeons, it's pretty much only ever for selfish reasons, right? Now that go ahead.
It's too simple as this. Okay, you want your solo dungeon, so I'm going to put my developer to make you a solo dungeon. Or I put that developer to make me a dungeon that can be played by 5 people. I can please one person or I can please 5 people. Of course, that same dungeon is going to be played by many more people. You can just multiply those numbers.
Yeah, and
I know. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and obviously, whenever you bring this into other games, that has even more of an impact in a sense. Like a common argument people use about group finders is, I don't have the time to get somebody into my group, and my argument's always that's fine. But guess what? You don't get to complain about the quality of your teammates. You don't get to expect everyone to be somehow like already knowing what's gonna happen in these dungeons or raids, just because you make that assumption. That doesn't even make any sense. You don't even know these people. There's no assumptions you should be making other than the fact that they can use their character adequately enough.
I'm going to be a gatekeeper in here. If you don't have the time to be social in a virtual world, then maybe you should be playing a different sort of game.
Well, I do want to attack that, and I'm not saying even necessarily being against that mentality, but I understand this mentality because I've been studying it a lot. It's basically a social mentality of a person who doesn't actually understand that their mentality is not very social. Whether that's because they have issues or just simply because they're not aware of it, right? It doesn't mean you're fucked up if you're not aware of it, but it just oftentimes you're probably not actually aware of the social dynamics and how that stuff affects things. Like I've spoke to my friends I'm sure you have many times, late nights, where they're sitting to me like crying about their teammates and like in fucking even LFRs, like things like that, where I'm just like, are you serious? Like, I mean, think about that. Like, if I'm a good basketball player, if I go to the fucking court and pick up 4 randoms, like, what do you think my expectations are? I'll tell you, as a pretty good basketball player, my teammates are gonna suck. That's my expectation. Even if I go to a gym, you might say, yeah, but what if you go to a gym and there's a nice gym? Doesn't mean anything. People could be decked out in full Jordan gear and suck at basketball. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just the same thing in MMOs. People could have every gear piece be gear score 5 billion and still not know how to,
Still
like,
don't know shit.
exactly. These are very complex games, and games that, in a sense, are not just about skill, they're also about your character's ability. So if you can get a powerful character, you can overcome a lot of instances of having to learn and overcome things with your own skill. That is honestly a bit of a problem with MMOs in a sense, is that you get carried, as we
Oh yeah.
say, by your character. We used to say that in Darkfall Online, as I'm sure you've said in EVE Online to many people too. Is we would like argue to people, you're not even good, you're just carried by your character. And that is actually
I
like a
mean,
very deep debate we used to have in PvP circles.
yeah, I mean, I do think that characters these days, you're just too powerful. Like, and then they're trying to introduce like these mythic tier contents and yada 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 instead of just like toning down everything and just making the player skill become more of a factor once again, which is
Mhm.
also part in just good game design. It's like if the only way for people to overcome this challenge is by being stupidly overgeared, then I honestly think that I've designed this challenge wrong. It should be a case where people that are really bloody smart can actually win this challenge. Instead of being constant DPS checks and shit like that, which are really boring and lazy design in my opinion, design, all sorts of different encounters, things that happen that if you do it properly, you can actually still win that encounter. Now, maybe if you're geared better, you can choose it's like, hey, we can skip this one step and actually focus more on doing the damage because our healers are, better geared now slightly and they know really well what to do. So we can take that extra hit of AoE damage that we would otherwise avoid. So you can speed up that progress slightly. But if you don't have that yet, you should still be able to overcome it by being good and doing good teamwork. Because like good teamwork is really what if you're gonna make a virtual world is what you should be building your game around for the higher end challenges. Teamwork should be everything.
Yep. Yeah, and even like too, like I think the common misconception is that it should take forever. That was the genius
No.
of games like Phantasy Star and Guild Wars, was that they're actually games that the content doesn't take that long to do, but it can still be challenging. And it's funny because I see a post here on this Reddit thread where it's posted by somebody who apparently plays Guild Wars too, but they say a big part of the video game audience is I only have 20 minutes, or sorry, I only have 20 minutes only kind of audience. So saying this is like because it's like essentially just like a consequence of gaming in general. And I think that that's a bit ironic because Guild Wars was literally created by people who played and designed WoW and thought, you know what, let's go after an audience who doesn't have time. So first, for starters, the industry already exists for players like that. That's what I don't get about the complaints that players make, where it's like, yeah, but I don't want to spend time having to find. Well, there's like 7 other games for you to play. You can
Yeah.
play Final Fantasy 14. You can play Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2. You could play The Secret World. There's so many examples of games. Even SWTOR has the little robot who can accompany you on flashpoints. Like, so many of these games have essentially trivialized it completely so you can play almost by yourself. So just go play those games. There's already a market for that stuff. And if you want to still have the survival, or rather the sandbox feel, go play a survival game. You can play that solo. I mean, ask Card. Cards play them solo, so I.
Yep.
Go play those survival games. If you want to have the solo
Right.
experience where you're building and you're kind of like doing shit like that, there's other games for that. It's just, it gets weird when people start pushing this ideal for every virtual world, a genre that's supposed to be completely like unique in the sense that it's like very expanded, so many things in it.
I mean, there's a good reason. Like, there are many reasons I don't play EVE Online anymore. But one of those reasons is simply put, is like I am not willing to put the time investment needed into that game anymore. So I play other games that require less time investment than EVE would do to play it at the level and do the things that I was doing in EVE. That's an active choice that you can just make. Even if your life changes, change other things along with it. Sometimes that means you have to say goodbye to a game that you've been playing for 10 years. Like, don't get suckered in that you need to stick around with certain things. Like, branch out, go play other stuff. There's plenty out there, and you will find games that are going to be enjoyable for your playstyle that you desire or that your life currently allows.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful about making excuses for bad ideas, whether in game design or just in general. Like, I'll give you an example.
Oh yeah.
This poster, and this is the touchy part of the discussion. I mean, you knew this was coming,
Ooh.
which is that this person says, well, it's because people are bombarded with social interactions 24/7 via social media, Discord, or whatever. Those aren't real social interactions. So, like, to be clear, if you're just interacting through social media, it's not a real social interaction. These are not designed to be healthy places to interact socially. And I can show you like 20 fucking studies, pipelines to fucking being a not, you know what I'm saying? Nazi. Like, there's so many examples where it's like, if you put yourself in this virtual space of social media, which is not a virtual world, it's a fake place, right? It's the internet, it's the expanded version of our place. You literally would go crazy or have a totally delusional view of how socialization is supposed to work, because that's not how socialization is supposed to work. A good example of that is like boomers being obsessed with Facebook. Um, is Facebook the place that any of us here in chat use for socialization? Probably not, right? So who the fuck are they talking to? Probably other old people or robots, like, because it ain't like everybody else, right? And like here, what?
But I will.
Oh, go ahead.
I will say, like, when it comes to social media, it does depend on the platform because, like, Discord can be used to be a good place to interact with a bunch of people that are your friends.
I feel
If
the
you
same
have,
way
you
about
know,
Instagram.
yeah, your smaller environments in there are still fine. But if you're going to join a Discord server with 500,000, tens of thousands of people, that's no longer a proper social environment. It's just a giant crowd.
Exactly. Yeah, and I wasn't even trying to talk shit about Discord, because Discord actually, to your point, is an exception because it's effectively a third place. Like, it's a place you can
Yeah,
go and actually have social interactions, unlike you would in social media in places like Twitter or X, where you have limited in characters, or places like Instagram where you can't talk to each other unless you have like follows and like all this like weird like like information transfer with each other. So like there's some of these examples where it's like most people wouldn't want to be social there. So Discord is optimal. So maybe people feel like, oh, because people have more social interactions there, they're having less in general. But the problem is that science hasn't backed this up, what this person's saying. Science has actually shown, and anthropology has shown, that socialization is getting worse. So that means that we're getting less of it, not more of it. What people are getting more of is what they think is socialization, which is just doom scrolling on Instagram, watching, I get it, sometimes videos of fat asses and, cool tech
leaving YouTube
inventions.
comments.
But yeah, but then next thing you know, it's like I doom scroll when I'm post gym, because if I was doing that shit all day, I do think it would be bad for me. And that's not me being on a moral stand to make people feel bad. It's because I'm just being honest that I'm a very addictive person. I should not do bad habits. You know what I'm saying? As much as I can avoid them. So I try not to do things like doom scrolling because I know that that's not socialization. So I actually push back against this because I don't think that this is real. I'm sorry. I think places like Reddit are a great example of this, where if you actually try to have conversations with people, people label you as
You
being
can't.
mad, crazy, or you get banned. So true story. I was on Fox Moy, one of like the very like liberal left wing. I don't want to say liberal because it's more like left wing Reddits, and they were talking. I think I might have talked to you about this, or it might have been one of my other friends. But Sabrina Carpenter recently had this like cover where she's like has like a leash on, and she looks like she's being like subservient. And the subreddit Fox Moy, which I don't follow, but it's in awe. So sometimes you see it, which I like as a feature. That's a cool thing that forums used to have too. It was called new posts. Remember, you could just look at
Yep.
whatever was new. And I was always a browser, so I was always doing that stuff. So that I was doing that, and so I'm in Fox Moy, and or Moy or whatever the fuck it's called, and somebody says like, "Oh, this is so degrading to women," and I was like, "Wait, she organized this herself. That means she consented to it. Why are you trying to like do the whole meme where it's like, I consent to this, you consent to this card, but have you asked fucking John F. Kennedy?" It's like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, ask some random other third person. Why am I asking this other person? Like, that's the meme, is that I'm not, because the consent was already reached between the two parties. But I got banned for saying that. Literally. That's just true, and also true amongst the LGBTQ plus community, which is that if you consent and you agree with it, that's you're agreeing to consenting with that person. You're okay with that stuff.
Yeah, but
But
that's the
that's how
problem. It's
bad
like,
discourse is.
yeah, people are all about, we need to have freedom to be and do what we want. But if people then use that freedom to be and do what they want, something that is inherently like not dangerous or mean or offensive directly to somebody, it's like, yeah, but that's not what I want. Well, yeah, no, they're a different person. They're making their own decisions. Are they actively trying to hurt you with a decision? No, then shut the fuck up.
Like, listen to this post and tell me this is not the post of an antisocial person who, look, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. This is not to shame people who have social issues. Both Card and I learned how to be social from the internet. So if you want to listen to
Yep.
people, we're kind of the people you want to listen to, in my opinion, because we've literally lived through the experiences. And I mean, Card learned English online from playing video games and being in social places.
Yeah, role playing.
So like this, and I know so many of my Mexican friends here in Mexico that are the same way. They learned from playing fucking Fortnite or playing games online where they would talk to people in English or hear people talk in English. So like what this person says here is this. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. This is like a big thought in this person's head. The most toxic element of any game, whether it's online, is the other people. I'm sorry. What the fuck?
You realize
Are
that
you
you are part of that.
Yes. Like you're not also affecting other people negatively. That's incredibly self-centered and arrogant to assume that you also don't have negative effects on other people. And second, that's just called human nature. We're not all perfect. Sometimes we do make things worse. You guys ever been to a zoo or like fucking museum? Oh man, I have so many examples. I went to a museum one time, and the whole time I'm having to listen to someone tell these like, I think they were like visiting from China, but they didn't barely understand English. Like, hey, don't touch the fucking display. They have to keep telling them that over and over again. It got to the point to where I'm like sitting there and I'm just like, all right, I'm about to like karate chop this person. And that's not a racial reference. I actually know karate. And yeah, because I was getting mad. Because I was like, dude, stop touching shit. And you know how many other times I've been in, for example, Europe, and I've been in museums and people keep walking in the way of the exhibit. And I'm just like, were you never taught etiquette? Why are you in the way of the exhibit? It's just like so strange. People do it at churches all the time. They'll, like stand in the way of like the procession. It's just like, what are you?
Stand in the middle of the hallway,
Yeah,
ideally where there's no space to walk around you.
exactly. Or off to the way where, museums are curated, aka they're designed for you to walk around in them. So meaning like, don't fucking stand right there in front of the display case. But anyway, yeah, like
It's fine if
madness.
you
Exactly. The answer is people suck. But people sucking is not a reason to take away our ways of learning how to socialize, our ways of learning how to learn other languages, learn other cultures, and more. Let me get on the soapbox real quick, and then I'll hand it to you for yours, Card, since we both have our own kind of story, which is that, look, guys, the reason why I care so much about this stuff is not because I want to tell other people, wow, you're not social, you suck. No, it's not that. It's because I want to remind people we're fucking human beings. We kind of need to be social, and social skills is actually one of the most important skills you can have, including as technology is only continuing to grow, AI, machinery, you name it. And I know people working in both of these fields. So it's like, yes, these things are moving. How do you beat that stuff? Socialization, ingenuity that comes from having human interaction. So my story, really quickly, the Spark Notes version, because many people already know it, which is that when I was young, I was one of the only kids that was into like nerdy stuff and video gaming in my kind of like neighborhood, right? There was like one, maybe two other kids like that. Everybody else played sports and played sports to the point to where I would end up playing sports because my friends played sports. Not even because I was like Mr. Sports guy. I literally like my friends were playing it and it was like a game to me. I was like, okay, I'll play this game. But like I just always wanted to play games even when I was a young kid. And part of that was because my grandpa taught me how to play chess and so on and so forth, and taught me how to play StarCraft, which is such a crazy story, and Warcraft as well, but never taught me how to socialize. So when I was playing these games online, I literally was learning like a fucking toddler how to talk to people. I still remember the first time people would say stuff to me and I would like read it and be like, what are they saying something to me? Like, are they talking to me? Like, and I'm sure you can remember stuff like that too, Card, where I would have experiences like where I'm like, wow, is this person asking me a question? Or someone would add me as a friend and I would be like, why are they adding me as a friend? Like, because I was such a young kid. We're talking 7, 8 years old, guys, when I started playing virtual worlds. So like, I'm so young that I have no fucking clue what the fuck is even what I'm even doing. So, and I'm playing these games, and what I started learning was that there's people online and in these different worlds that I could actually learn from, and not just learn from, but that I could be friends with. And that was crazy to me because they were a lot more like me. You see what I'm saying? So someone like me who was on the spectrum, autistic, ADHD, due to my CPTSD, aka complex, post-traumatic stress, like I was all over the spectrum, okay? Even if I was smart, I had a hard time, as I'm sure many of you maybe can relate, interacting with other people, especially in person. Because like, yeah, I would play sports, but I would play sports like a mute because I didn't know how to interact
Yep.
with other people. It sounds like I'm kidding, but literally, when I would go to restaurants, my dad would order for me. So I was incredibly, incredibly introverted as a kid, incredibly socially shy. And it was because my parents never taught me how to like interact with people. So like without virtual worlds, I wouldn't even be here. And that's not just saying like from a life perspective because they help save my life, but literally like I wouldn't have the friends that I have. Like Card is a friend of mine I've met in person as well, and we met first online and on Discord, and then in many different video games, and I have many more examples like that. So like without virtual worlds, I wouldn't have had a social life nor ever learned how to create one. So what about you, Card? Without like having these social concepts like introduced to you in these virtual worlds.
I mean, quite frankly, if I hadn't like found for me where it started was doing role play in Star Trek on forums. And the simple truth is, if that was not my introduction and from there into virtual worlds, yeah, I simply would not be here in this realm of existence anymore. I think that's not a strange thing to say, and something that I've considered fairly deeply over time when I just analyzed the trajectory here. But then that's those lessons of going through there, being talking to these people, and also talking. I think one of the other strengths of these areas and locations in these virtual worlds is like you're talking with people from all over the world, from all walks of life, and they'll all tell you stories from their life and their experiences and how they're dealing with things. And you start to realize that all of these different people, you may not like necessarily every single one of them, but all of them, they're there. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to just, have a good time. So they may not all become your friends, but you are starting to understand them, to see how their worldviews are, and how those worldviews may, in your opinion, be right or wrong, or maybe change yours as well. You can start when you start to get a little bit more comfortable talking with these people, which does take time. Like we call them social skills for a reason. Skills take time to develop. And this is not something I'm going to learn social skills in a year. Like if you're done with the first year, congratulations, you have done the beginner course. That's the reality of it. Like with any skill, it takes a long time to develop. But as you develop that skill and you start talking with all of these people, your own worldview starts to change simply because you have a broader perspective of all that is going around. And
Yeah.
with that broader perspective, especially if you're a creative, or even if you're more on the analytical side, both of them, but especially if you're creative, it just allows you to become so much better as a creative.
Yep.
And yeah, like I said, like nurses said, being on the spectrum, like I'm also on the spectrum. I was diagnosed when I was in my low 20s, so it took a fair while. So my diagnosis came well after I was playing virtual worlds. But through that combination, and actually, ironically enough, being autistic to a medium level, and training all of your social skills like this, it allows one to become almost a social chameleon. Like I can be in a very good social standing with a really broad scale of people. And that is something that is in many ways, a superpower. Whether you're online in the virtual world trying to achieve something with your guild, which one of the things is if you're like this and you train these skills, believe me, if you join a guild and you're anything semi decent at the game that you're playing, you're probably going to become asked to become an officer within 6 months' time.
100%.
So that's if your goal is that, learning social skills, it's great for that. But also in real life, it helps you massively when no matter what jobs you're doing, being able to interact with people very well, just very quickly understanding the sort of person that you're dealing with, talking to them on their level that they are comfortable with. Because keep in mind, most people that you're going to be interacting with, you don't need to become friends or whatever. You just need to do an interaction with them
Mm-hmm.
in the most polite, efficient manner possible. So I'm just going to be like, okay, maybe this person is leaning in a political direction that I'm completely polar opposed to. It doesn't matter. I'm here to do my job. So I'm just going to talk to them on that same level, put on my social chameleon hat, get the stuff resolved, and move on.
Yep. Teaches you how to deal with conflict too, because you have to
Yeah.
conflict, or you have to have conflict
I
in order to resolve it.
My previous job, I recently was this was recruiters had to call some of my old colleagues because I was looking for a new job. And the recruiter came back to me and they were like, both of the colleagues that I talked to, they were like, can you please come back? And one of the reasons was when I arrived in that job, they were literally fighting, like almost to a level where they were going physical with each other. Within 3 months' time, I got everybody to just work together calmly. Because I was there with social skills learned from all of these virtual worlds, interacting through all of this role play, all of these places, where I could just talk to each individual person, bring them down, come to a level of understanding where they had the feeling that I was listening to them and understanding what they were going on about, and I create peace.
Yeah, and I even have an
Social
example
skills are
too.
amazing.
No,
Go ahead.
absolutely, they're amazing. I was just gonna say like, someone earlier said like regarding your WoW story, they were like, oh well, that doesn't seem realistic, and I was like, I'll tell you guys a crazy story about social skills in MMOs, okay? So I was young, I was playing SWTOR. I think I was like 18 at the time, and I met this other guy had the same name as me. Actually, maybe his name's different because it's French, but or anyway, I'll explain after. So anyway, and we were immediately friends because of that. We had the same name, and well, I think when it's translated in English is what I'm trying to say. And we also just got along well. I was a recruiter for this big, like, MMO gaming guild that played a bunch of games together. And he wanted to become a recruitment officer. And I still remember doing, like, having to teach him how to organize stuff. And, like, the reason why this is so funny in hindsight is this guy would then end up taking over, like, the position for me after I would leave. And later on would contact me. And I would actually encounter him at a fucking event. And guess what? He ended up working as a community manager slash like whatever the term is in Canada. I don't know what they call it at Ubisoft. He works at Ubisoft, and he still works at Ubisoft. I actually think he's currently a game designer, but at the time was a community moderator slash manager, whatever they call them, liaison, and worked on Rainbow Six Siege, the big one. And yeah, so before people try to say this stuff doesn't matter, socialization doesn't matter, it's like that guy went from being like a kind of awkward nerd who just likes Star Wars, literally, to being the guy who runs the community for an Ubisoft game. The current game he works for, I don't want to spoil it because I just don't want to like say who he is, but you guys could probably figure it out eventually. But yeah, and there's many more stories like that where people got their
Yeah.
start through just playing games and having interactions with people in communities. And I think what we start missing when we start to support these like very toxic behaviors, because people like this want to say it's toxic, to be overly competitive. And the truth is, it is. But is that really saying anything like new? No. Um, Elite players and players at the highest level, I can tell you as somebody who, you know, is pretty good in my country for martial arts, um, that people end up being kind of toxic or full of themselves. Like it actually ends up being kind of common when people are that level of competitive, right? Maybe that's not a good thing, but it's pretty common. So like this person argues here, oh, the most toxic element I ever experienced of WoW was the fucking the heroic plus system or the mythic plus system, and I'm like, that is literally where the most toxic players would go. Like what?
Yeah. But also, it's because the way that system was designed again to be no longer the social place. So yeah, you're going to encounter a lot of these toxic people because if you have proper people that really want to achieve in a team environment something, they understand that their high level of skill is something that they need to use to elevate people around them to train. Like when I was playing PlanetSide 2, I am never going to claim that I'm the best shooter player because I'm not. But I did join what I would argue is probably one of the best organizations in a game ever, with just how capable we were. And why were we so capable? Was it because we had the best FPS gamers around? No, because we understood that we need to operate as a team, which means that the team objective will always come before the individual objective. So if you design your game around that aspect as well, so if I'm designing my raids and my dungeons, it's like, hey, there's a team objective here, not a personal objective. That should be the focus. But if I'm having just random people, I'm taking away the team objective because we are all there for our own individual gain and not for our overall group gain. Which is why I'm also a big supporter for not just awarding individual loot, but also having something like a reward for a guild if you do a dungeon together as a guild.
No, absolutely. And that's actually ironically, we've talked about this before outside of this chat, which is that like more things that are sports like being introduced would actually be good because what people
Yep.
don't seem to understand about sports is that they're older than video games and they're super successful and there's no reason these two can't coexist and learn from each other. And ironically, the coolest part of this interaction lately, in my opinion, is the fact that many virtual worlds offer experiences that sports can't. And that's because a point you made earlier that I want to go back to is that you talked about the variety of play in person. That's the beauty of it. People don't know that sports, I'm sorry guys, sports doesn't really work that way. As somebody who grew up playing basketball on the streets and in different gyms for open gyms, yeah, I would play with a 30-year-old, 40-year-old every now and then. You know, that's kind of more common because they're still at a healthy age to play. Did I ever play with 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds? Never. Did I ever play with maybe like, stay-at-home moms or something? No, because they weren't at the gym. Like, did I ever play with like a stay-at-home dad or like a dad who works like a fuck ton? Maybe because maybe sometimes, but maybe not always because they didn't have enough time to go do an activity that required them to drive somewhere else. So the point that I'm making is like with virtual worlds, you end up exposing this entire new audience of players to each other and having these experiences together. And that's why I can, people like Carter and I can get very like almost hostile at certain ideas like, hey, let's make the game more, antisocial or make it more solo focused is because unless that's the game that you're building, you're making it worse for everybody else just because that's what you want. And that inherently
Yep.
is not a good mindset to have because it's just like you're better off to just, realize a game like that maybe isn't for you. Or I'll go a step further and say maybe you should start to ask yourself why that bothers you so much. Like that you have to like work with other players. Because if that
That's the real question.
no, really, if that's intrinsically something that comes to the forefront every time you think about this sort of stuff, it's what I talk about. Remember we talk about the traumatized PvPer. So, chat for context, I oftentimes meet PvPers or former PvPers who are very much traumatized because they basically had a bad experience. And so what I end up having to do is I treat them like a human being that's actually traumatized. But then I end up telling them at the very end that ultimately you feel this way because you got beat in a video game. Like, that's more indicative of you as a person, to be clear. That's not other people being evil. um, because you shouldn't.
You can
Go ahead.
you consented to an engagement and you lost.
Yeah. Yeah, and SDD makes a good point. These are tourists, not locals, and that's a big part of the problem is that so much of the market got designed for tourists to where, if anything, we could joke for a second and say that the virtual world industry got gentrified. We stopped learning about innovation. We stopped learning that other ideas can work. And apparently, we stopped learning that the only thing that really makes this genre unique is the fact that we play with other players. I feel like I have to mention this every time, but it's just true that this is not an opinion that MMO, RPG storytelling has never been at the forefront. That graphics in virtual worlds have never been the best. That the gameplay in virtual worlds has never been competitive with like console and other PC games. I can keep going and it'll make virtual worlds at the end of it sound like they suck, right? What's good about them? They get beat in every single genre. Well, they blend it all together and blend it together in a way that lets you feel included and lets you have some level of identity. So you become attached to a character. Something that some of these other games can't do in the same level of effectiveness. And some don't do at all. So you don't feel connected at all. So that's why power fantasies can be very addicting. Because it does feel like you're the one going through this power fantasy. The problem is again, this is a bit of a dark question. You have to ask yourself, if I'm only playing power fantasies, am I developing myself to ever overcome challenges? I'm just saying, there's just a question you could ask. Because the answer is probably not. And I think that encountering some challenge, including in a video game, is not just fun, I think it's good for you.
And especially, I think, encountering challenges that are challenges that you can overcome together is where things get really start to shine.
And like you said, with your differences, that's the part people keep missing. That's why it annoys me whenever people have this mentality of, why can't my class 1v1 everybody? Why can't my class be the highest damage dealer in the dungeon? Because the real world doesn't work like that either. Like, in fantasy worlds that work like that, I'm sorry, I just don't like personally. Because there's nothing unique about you.
Like, when I was playing those Burning Crusade raids with my hunter in blues and greens, would I top the damage meters? Well, ironically, because of how the balance was at times, yes. But there were also encounters where my job was not do damage, but my job was, you're a hunter, you can kite. So your job is to keep those 3 mobs occupied for the next 10 minutes. Or something like that. So just run around the room, keep them aggroed on you, and don't get hit. Because our healers are busy healing the people that should actually be healed. You're a hunter, you should not get hit. That was my job. You're doing a different job, you're doing different things. And could every hunter player pull that off? Maybe not. But if you could not pull that off as a hunter player, and that was a required job of you as a hunter player, well, that's then your individual challenge within this virtual MMO to learn yourself that skill. Because the group needs you to have that skill.
Yes.
And that's one of those other things. It's like, because you're playing together as a group, there's going to be demands put on you from the game, but there's also going to be demands put on you from the group. Because when you're operating in a team environment, like I said, you're there as a team. So the team is going to need certain things. And those certain things will demand from you that you put in certain effort, whether that is grinding your resources so that you have your potions ready, or making sure that you got a certain skill lockdown. And maybe that means, hey, our main tank is also used to be playing a hunter. He was fairly good at this. You're going to him, it's like, hey, can you help me out? And they can be like, oh, yeah, I can help you out. Just help me out, do something else. You exchange time with each other to both grow from this lesson and this encounter.
And even like I want to go a step further, and I've made this argument before, like a few years ago, which is that like a common like thing that gets pushed is people say, yeah, but it's because these games are all like power focused, so everyone just wants to get to the top as fast as possible. Well, first off, that's still controlled, meaning you can still control how fast you're doing that. It's just you feel like you have to go really fast because the games are designed that way. They're designed to push you to the end. They're designed to make you feel like, okay, I need to perform at like quote unquote my best. But like when you compare that to almost any other hobby, you realize how absurd it is. Like for example, when I go fishing, and I'm somebody who started catching fish when I was like 4, I oftentimes watch people with gear that's 3 times, 5 times more expensive than me have no fucking idea how to like tie a line, no idea how to cast a line, which is even funnier to me because it's just like, isn't that the whole point? It's like you have to. That's the first thing you learn is like you bait up then cast, but it's like that's because skill levels differ in all hobbies at all levels. So it's not just like all pros are out there in the fucking piers with me or whatever. No, these are a lot of just like regular people who just want to fish sometimes or just having a good time or maybe don't have like a view of viewing this of like I really want to raise my skill level, but here's the difference. Fishing can be solitary. When I'm playing a team activity or a team sport, the reason I can't do it all by myself, as people often ask in virtual worlds, is because I'm not supposed to do it all by myself. That's not the point of a fucking game. Like,
It
and
isn't.
and I get a little bit aggressive about it because what I used to listen to decades ago was so many people pushing that ideology. More solo content, less group force, less group content, less group this. The problem with all of that is you guys kind of, and I don't mean you guys, I mean the proverbial you guys. You got us in this predicament where now we almost have no virtual worlds that are really facilitating good social interactions, especially the newer ones, where I tell people when I played games like SWTOR and Final Fantasy XIV, I never talked to anybody ever on purpose just to prove a point that I could do it. And yeah, I was right. I could beat those games without ever having to talk to anybody. At that point, I'm sorry, this one, maybe I'm just too autistic on this particular point, but you'll never be able to convince me why don't I just play a single player RPG? People oftentimes will counter with, yeah, but I like to play a game with other people around me. And you know what I want to say to people that say that? You like to play in parasocial worlds where you aren't actually having social interactions. So that's probably the difference I have with people like that, is that I actually want social interactions. So I don't want make-believe ones. If I'm not going to interact with people around me, can they please get the fuck out of my game? Seriously. Don't you feel like that in SWTOR sometimes when you have someone fucking riding their speeder around in front of your fucking like instance? You're just like, yo, dude, can you get the fuck out of my game? And you shouldn't feel that way. It's an online RPG. It doesn't make sense.
But their presence doesn't give you any remote formal benefit. So yeah, if somebody else is there killing your mobs, it is literally PvP because they're killing the mobs that you want to kill.
100%.
But at no point throughout playing that game, outside if I really wanted to do some raid content, then the chances that that person is going to be the one that's going to help me is going to be zero anyway. So yeah, they're just useless. They're just there to be there. But well, if I need some character in my video game to be just there, that can also just be an NPC. That's fine. I can just drive around Night City in Cyberpunk, completely fine. Probably feels more alive than most virtual worlds these days. Sadly enough to say, because it's the same level of interaction. It just feels more alive.
Yeah, and even just like Guild Wars 1 is such a cool thought experiment because it basically tackles this idea of like, what if we made an online RPG that's so cooperative that will even make it after the second expansion essentially playable by yourself? I've talked about this before from an artistic, like intellectual perspective, and I'm sure you'd agree with me. I actually think that this is pretty genius. However, simultaneously, I have to also acknowledge it's also a bit anti-world, right? Because guess what happened after Nightfall came out? The world did get worse. Anyone that tries to argue against that, I'm sorry, you just weren't there. And I was. I was playing the game when these games came out and the expansions came out. And when Nightfall came out, everything changed because suddenly you could just use heroes and you didn't need players in your party anymore to beat the stories. And so that became how people play these games. So that's an example of how a small, seemingly innocent thing, oh, well, I just want people to play with whenever I don't have people to play with. And it's like, okay, well, you offer that in a game, and maybe some games should have something like that. Almost all single player RPGs do. For example, I'm playing fucking Red Dead Redemption right now, too. And I have a gang, if you guys have played the game. They're NPCs, guys. These are not players. I don't need them to be players because I'm playing a game. That makes me a single player guy who's kind of like the head honcho, but not really. You see what I'm saying? So it's like I don't always need players around me. Because if these guys are NPCs and they're designed to be in my gang, then I just role play into that environment. These are my NPCs, these are my homies. If I wanted to play something different, I'd go play Rust.
And it's also the difference there. It's like those NPCs are coded and created in a way that they feel natural-ish to that world that they're inhabiting.
Yes.
Players, when we're playing games, we don't behave
Mm-hmm.
in a logical, natural way for the environment we're in because we're playing a game. So we're naturally behaving differently in a world than a normal person would. Like, how many of you, when you're playing a game, walk? Think about that one. How often do you make your character walk in your video game instead of running everywhere? Now look at real life. If you're going to the shop, are you always running to the shop? If you go outside, are you always running? If you're walking around the hallway at your work, are you running or are you walking? These are the kind of things that you start to notice. So then when I've got these players that are going around me, they're not behaving as a natural part of this world. So immersion-wise, they are actually a detraction from my immersion factor. Because they are a anomaly in what one would expect. But they're an anomaly that also doesn't do anything. And yeah, the other year says like, yeah, you can just go up to them and talk to them. I have, and I'm fairly sure that you have as well quite often. People just don't respond and just go away because people just think you're weird.
I mean, that must have happened to me probably 15 years ago that I learned that lesson. That like when I play these sorts of online RPGs that are not very massive or social focused, most of the time people don't even want to talk to me. So it seems like it's just like I'm doing them a favor by just doing my own thing.
Exactly. And so these things are all detractors. They don't give me anything. So yeah, at that point, it's just like, well, they can just go away then. So I don't want them in my game anymore. So just give me a single player game. But if you're going to make me a multiplayer game, make it so that I actually need these people. Give us a reason that we're there, because if you don't give people an actual reason to group up, they won't. Because everybody should know by now, if you played games long enough, gamers will min-max the fun out of everything. That's also a lesson to all of your developers. You have to understand that. If you're going to give people a system that is marginally more efficient, the chances are the majority of people are going to be using that. And people are like, oh, but you can do some content faster if you're in a group. Yeah, but if I can do that one content faster in a group versus individually, each 5 of us doing that same content individually, we are slower individually a little bit, but we're each doing that whole level of content. And depending on your game, quite often that may become to a point where that is actually more efficient, loot-wise, progression-wise, than working together.
Yeah, and even like in chat, people were making jokes. Buffmaster said, "You guys don't jump around in real life all the time." Well, like honestly, like whenever I'm at the gym, a lot of us do. You see what I'm saying? Because it's a place that we go to move around and have fun physically. The problem is another part of these virtual worlds and why they also feel so antisocial. And I think why some people feel like they have to do them by themselves is that I don't think everybody is designed to be the hero and the biggest soldier, killer, assassin guy. And yet, pretty much all of these games are designed like that, where you have to be the main hero. You have to be the one who's like the hero of the ages and the hero of this. And it's just like, There's no moments for you to just kind of be more normal. And I think that that also, as we've talked about recently, even impacts your ability to interface with people because you look at them as kind of being like beneath you or, like you said, not relevant because you don't need them.
If you're going to make me a, a dart sitting on the Dark Council in SWTOR, you're literally putting my character into a position that is second only to the Emperor. Which means that in the entire Empire, there's only the members on the Dark Council that are equal to me. Everybody else, if I kill them, like it would be nobody would give a damn about it.
Yeah, especially with Sith, because that's how it
Yeah.
works.
So you're putting myself in such an extreme position of power there. Indeed, from a lore perspective, from a roleplay perspective, you just don't put somebody in a position where you feel any level of vulnerability left. So naturally, people are going to gravitate to them. If you think that's not the case, go and try and roleplay in many of these games, and watch the kind of characters that people come up with. They are massively influenced by the stories that they're writing, and they're taking a lot of that power factor along with them. So people just feel like that, and we've really lost that original idea of like D&D times where you were a bunch of adventurers, which means what you are as a character is probably going to be slightly above average, because that's what an adventurer needs to be. You're not completely useless, but you are certainly not brilliantly amazing, because if you were brilliantly amazing, you were probably employed by some lord or king or whatever who's like, wow, you're really fucking good, I need to have you on my side. Or if you were the evil person, you were being hired by whatever big evil guy is around there. So you're going to be slightly above average. And that's why you tend to team up to overcome the challenge. It's like, oh, this is this really one powerful single baddie. None of us individually can beat him, but together we can. So we are not all that special. And by not being all that special, it just opens the world up so much more. Because you feel more vulnerable, but you also feel more likely to be like, hey, you know what? I don't feel like smacking everybody around. I'm just gonna start cooking and fishing.
Yeah, and before some people in chat think this is like an argument against class story or personal story, we were just talking about SWTOR being really amazing in that respect. It's actually like part of the problem is the reverse. Like people think, oh, then you're saying so, personal story and personal quests shouldn't exist. It's like, no, in reality, they should. The problem is in so many of these sandbox games, they don't exist. And so there's nothing to do in these games besides just kind of like become one with the environment and one with the world. And the truth is that's not good enough for most players. They don't feel connection to that. They don't have the ability to detach themselves like that and be like, okay, suddenly now I'm a part of EVE Online. They need something that's more of like, okay, how did I get to this point? And why am I here? Why does this matter to me? That's why
Nice.
WoW was so effective, because it was originally built on the story of telling your story as kind of like an adventurer slowly coming up. Meanwhile, Final Fantasy XIV, you're a hero god person because that's Final Fantasy. In Final Fantasy, you're almost always like essentially like a deity. So it makes
Yeah.
sense in that game. But if every game is designed like Final Fantasy XIV,
I mean, ironically enough, like if you want to make people a deity, you can still do that and still make them not as insane, but then you need to put them in a world full of deities. Because when you talk about EVE Online, in EVE Online, you're a capsuleer. Capsuleers are literally elite of elite. You have even the poorest capsuleer is stupendously rich. If you fly around in a battleship, lore-wise, there's like 1,000+ people on board that battleship to try and keep it in operation for you. So each time your battleship blows up, you live because you're the capsuleer. But those 1,000 people on the ship, they're dead. They're gone. But they're completely meaningless. But because you're in this world where everybody is like in this capsuleer and there's like these other factions that are even more powerful than you, you're still being kept somewhat in check. So in here, it is also a big degree of relativity. Like, how are you how is your power level compared to everything else in the world that you interact with?
Yeah, and even just like I hate this idea that you have to be a god in order to show power level. It's something that I feel like
Oh yeah,
haven't enough people watched anime? Like one of the most common aspects of anime is just like, especially shonen anime, is like you are powerful, you get your ass kicked by some other guy, and he has like some super powerful jutsu you don't even know about. You learn it, train against it, and then suddenly you come back and you beat his ass. That's like essentially what anime is in its nutshell. Like all shonen anime is that repeated over and over and over again as a concept. And yet it's just like in so many of these, online RPGs, especially the, you know, current modern ones, it doesn't feel like anime at all. It feels like you're already fucking, you're already Goku in his God Saiyan form or whatever. It's like, I get
yeah.
the allure of playing as God Saiyan Goku, but the beauty of God Saiyan Goku is the fact that all of us watched him for 20 years before he got there. You know what I'm saying? Like we watched him grow up from Dragon Ball and then grow right into, DBZ and then slowly become each Super Saiyan till he became a god. If he just was like Dragon Ball, little kid, then became a god, we wouldn't have got the same enjoyment from it.
Well, you wouldn't have cared. You wouldn't have grown. And character growth is really important. Now, of course, this is where virtual worlds have it a little bit more tricky because you you kind of need to keep characters somewhat down compared to a single player game where you can have that full length of growth until your character is really powerful. But when the character becomes too powerful, it also becomes boring. It just probably will end there. It's like a quote from my favorite writer of mine, David Weber. He was asked if he was ever going to continue the story of Alicia de Vries, the main protagonist in it's two novels. It's combined in one in Fury Born. And his answer was literally, "Is like, well, she's at a level where it's so powerful that it would be boring. There would not be a challenge in this universe I could put against her that would make it an interesting story."
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like we've talked about before, and on this, it's been nice chatting. But I actually need to
Yeah.
write Lost Ark today. Is that it's the problem with Ray. Like, yes, is there a little bit of sexism there? Of course, but Ray in Star Wars gets such a bad rep because they basically never gave her time to grow as a character. So she's just suddenly thrust into everything. No 10 years have passed, like in fucking the original prequel or whatever. And then, or even like think about fucking Lord of the Rings. After the first initial interaction, Frodo doesn't see Gandalf for another 30 years. Like, that's so much time has passed that we're already in the beginning of Lord of the Rings seeing so much storytelling and progression. You know what I mean? And then like in
Yep.
these other things, that level of progression and storytelling just isn't there. They throw you into a world, especially the new IPs, and they suddenly just expect you to give a fuck. And you almost never do. Also, side tangent, some fucking guy in chat recommended me some like weird like manosphere shit. If any of you guys want to recommend me shit like that, can you fucking go like Sudoku yourself in a video game? Like, cause obviously I'm not interested. Anyway, what were you gonna say?
No, I think it's a good one to just wrap it up on. Is like the power levels are something that needs to be managed, and in the virtual worlds, they need to be managed to and kept at a relatively just lower level because you want to focus people to be united to overcome challenges. And if people are by lore and by feel is like, hey, I am not this overpowered god, it just gives them the incentive as well to look towards other people.
Yeah,
It's like, well, maybe we need to be working together to overcome this challenge. Like,
yeah, you're teeing it
let
up perfectly, like they say in baseball or t-ball, of the sense of like you just explain why Andor worked, basically, which is that like it's about the people uniting together to overcome something that's bigger than themselves that individually they would get crushed by, right?
Yeah.
That's literally what Andor is. And it's funny how Star Wars fans used to push against that because guess what? They were defending the power fantasy stuff we were just talking about. Well, now Andor comes out and everybody loves it. This is funny.
But even if you have power fantasy, like look at the power fantasy we have seen a lot in the older days with Star Wars. It's like, yes, there is a lot of power in there, but they are not all powerful. They're still getting their ass kicked.
Yep.
Like even Master Yoda got his ass kicked. He had to back away. He had to flee. Like everybody just gets skill checked quite badly in there, and that is what you need in a smaller setting. For even in a single player game, like you need to get beaten down occasionally in order to claw back up. And in that virtual world setting, it's just like you're never gonna get that high up. But that's why you're all here together so that you can, hey, this guy is smacking us around with 5 people. Okay, we're gonna bring 40 people. Cause screw you.
Yeah, and even just like, and no, I said it was the last thing, but I just have to mention this, like, because I know people do love power fantasies. My one problem with it is the ones that come from already like existing universes, is that you're never gonna feel more powerful than you felt in a single player game. That's the issue I have with them. Like, for example, people defend Final Fantasy 14. Oh, it's a Final Fantasy game. If you just like Final Fantasy, you'll like it. And it's just a power fantasy Final Fantasy game. And I kind of push back and say, I don't think it's actually like a Final Fantasy game really that much at all. I think it's just like standard theme park MMO WoW style virtual world that has like Final Fantasy story elements and classes and kind of like IP, stuff mixed into it. But it doesn't really feel that Final Fantasy because it doesn't play like a Final Fantasy game typically does. And I think that's kind of my issue with it, really, is that like when I play Final Fantasy X, I go from being kind of like this like weak, pretty boy to end up being kind of like really powerful and the leader of my crew by the end of it. And I feel all of that power gain, and the game actually has a level of difficulty to it that I don't have to wait to the very end of it to experience. So I know I just ranted about Final Fantasy 14, but yeah, once again, to Final Fantasy 14 fans, it's nothing like the other Final Fantasy games. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But it was nice talking
In
to you.
short, balance your powers and don't make people gods. They don't have to be.
Yeah, next time we have Card on, we'll ask Card about Card's favorite power structure fantasy world, which is Harry Potter. All right, that's enough time we had. Card. No,
Oh god.
by the way, I'm kidding, guys. Card can't stand the Harry Potter universe in terms of power scaling, but that'd be funny if I just left it there. All right, it was nice talking to you.
Good talk.
Okay,
Thanks all.
see you.
And have a good day.
Yeah, you as well. Okay, everybody, thank you for stopping by. Thank Card for stopping by. That was a long chat. I figured we hadn't had one like that in a while. Card is a good person to talk about with virtual worlds because they have a lot of experience, but also their perspective is like different than mine in some ways. And so like we can either butt heads or end up having a very similar perspective from different angles. And I think that makes our analysis of things really good. I just wanted to get the comments done before I finished real quick. I gotta walk my dogs. Yeah, that was who that was, Madness. It was like someone posting some like manosphere stuff, which is just always weird when people post that stuff with me because it's just like, go click my Instagram. With all due respect, even if you think I'm gay or a fairy or an elf, I don't need help learning how to be manly. Anyway, so Dota said that nobody ever said that Ray is bad. Well, because nobody would say that. That would be retarded to say. Like, think about that. Who would say the quiet part out loud on purpose? Like, nobody would. You create all these reasons in your head why it's true. The reason why sexism is involved in people's hate of Rey, as I've talked about here before, is because many of the same issues she suffers from, Anakin has too. And people have, especially lately, revisionist history, the prequels, and have acted like Anakin's character wasn't absolutely absurd as well. And it was. His character didn't make sense and didn't really fit, and that's why George Lucas realized that and created the Clone Wars series to try to fix that problem. Which I'm, even though I'm an Anakin hater, I think it did a really good job of showing who Anakin really is, the good and the bad. Unit 645 says even Luke would never have succeeded without hand saving him. No, yeah, no, exactly, and that's part of what I love so much about Star Wars. You hit the nail on the head. Is that what I love so much about it is, yes, Jedi are popular. They're probably the most popular character, or characters. Yes, big executives don't think they can have a show or a series without Jedi in them. That's probably true to a certain extent. That being said, my issue that people seem to not understand about Star Wars is it's a story about adventuring with your friends. And more specifically, the people that are around you that you meet that end up being your friends, teammates, and important crewmates. It's about overcoming odds together. I like it because it's unlike Harry Potter's story that seems to be similar. Harry Potter's story is basically about like a privileged kid without such a privileged upbringing who basically met incredibly talented and capable people who protected him the entire way and eventually was able to kind of overcome things. I know that sounds like I'm being a dick about Harry Potter's storyline, but I mean, brass tacks, if you break it down, that's what it is, right? Is it better than I described it as? Sure. And of course, you can be a Harry Potter fan. I'm not trying to hate on Harry Potter. I'm just saying that, like, that's kind of like the moral of Harry Potter stories. Star Wars is more about overcoming the odds, which is why people like me hated so long that they kept trying to do big spectacle, and preferred when they tried to do things like Mandalorian and things like Andor and the expanded universe books, things that were more specialized. Star Wars seems to benefit more when it allows people to, you know, put themselves into a character's shoes and imagine they're going on an adventure. The problem is when you're doing these massive movies, and I think that that's why they keep failing at them, and probably will, besides obviously Rogue One, is because these movies are about appealing to everyone that wants to be a hero. That's a lot of freaking people. A lot of people want to be a hero, and for different reasons. And I think that that's the difficult part. Is the original Star Wars wasn't just about the hero's journey of Luke. It was also about his friends and family and teammates pulling him through key environments and him having to overcome things internally that were like a villain, you know? Yeah, so that's actually a good point, Dota. I'm surprised you know that because a lot of people don't, which is why it's hard to discuss Star Wars in general. Is that Star Wars isn't a power fantasy, actually. Um, that's kind of the point that I'm making. Is it's not supposed to be about you overcoming everything on your own like Harry Potter did, or getting carried by his super powerful friends like Harry Potter did. No, it was about doing things in spite of everything, right? He's like the unlikely. Luke is the unlikely hero. I know people thought after the newest movies came out, for some weird revisionist reason, that Luke was this massive like action hero. No, Luke was a hero because he was the only one who could do it, and because he was the one that did it. You know what I'm saying? Meaning he's unlikely. That's what makes him so lovable. In the movies, he's very lovable because he's like just everybody's guy who kind of gets caught up in things. Doesn't have any time to train because remember the movies don't last for very long, so he doesn't have any time to train. Then suddenly has to fight his dad to the death, loses, almost fucking dies, fights him again, and then realizes like the fight wasn't against his dad, it was against himself. Once he was able to beat himself and convince his dad he could do it, his dad is the one that won the fight. Right? Everyone thinks it's like some other. No, it's like the writers have literally said this. So I'm not like I'm Mr. Nerd. No, writers said this. That it was the director said it. That it was a story about Luke overcoming his darkness in the final. So yeah, you're right. It's not a power fantasy. It's kind of more of like the story of these ups and downs and overcoming these things, like a grand adventure. But obviously over time it became more about Jedi being more powerful. In the prequels, they put a lot more effort into the Jedi showing their power more explicitly, which wasn't how it was done in the previous movies. And now they have only had to top that, including with the animated stuff, where now Jedi are like super samurai magic wielders. Um, and not just like principled monks who can fight. Um, so it kind of expanded. I don't think George could have stopped that. I think it got so big before George ever actually created the world yet. He was just creating movies. And that's kind of why it feels so like hodgepodge in some ways. I know you guys aren't fans of Jedi Fallen Order, but it did get one thing wrong. The last confrontation with you know who. I'm not EA, won't spoil it. Shows a greater power disparity. Yeah, and you know, man, you guys are gonna keep making me rant and not be able to leave, but I need to write today, so relax. But I hate Jedi Fallen Order because it's so fucking easy, so trite, feels like a regression from Force Unleashed. And because I think it's actually worse than Jedi Knight and Jedi Academy at the respective times that those games came out. Meaning that if Fallen Order came out at that time with those games in the same kind of graphical and like for the times, just based on its features and story alone, it would have been eaten alive by Jedi Academy and Knight or Outcast. I think truly eaten alive because it would have just been treated like a narrative game, which people liked even back then. But I mean, Jedi Academy was insanely good. So was Outcast. That's my opinion. It's more that Fallen Order is just not good amongst its own even competition of Star Wars games that were great. But overall, do I think it's like a bad game? Like, probably not. It's just mid. No, I didn't interview Ross from SKG. I've thought about it, but we don't typically handle like a crap ton of the stuff that happens in regards to stopping the preservation, or rather the anti-preservation efforts. We more so actually focus on the parts that SKG and Ross doesn't focus on, which he's talked about, which is more so the games who've moved to private servers and community servers. So if anything, Ross is focused on the part before that, and I'm focused on the part after. So it doesn't mean that we're not focused on the same things and we're not aligned. I follow Ross. I've told Ross on Ross's videos before that I like their content and that I support the movement. But do you see what I'm saying? Is like my audience is the end part of that effort, and his is the beginning. And I'm not saying there can't be overlap or whatever else, but it's just like I make content here and I focus on these parts. So I don't really think it's like I can say I support it as I've said many times, but I don't really think people would be surprised by that. Does that make sense? Because it's kind of like saying like I'm a doctor, but don't I think it's a little bit weird I have to apply my medical ability here? It's like, well, I would expect that because I'm a doctor and I'm not, but for the analogy's sake, you see what I'm saying? So for me, it's kind of like I cover Dead and Dying games and their support in community servers. Like, of course I support SKG. Stop killing games. It's my job to cover the games that have been affected by things that didn't get fixed by this movement. And for people wondering, oh, is it just because you want the games to die to support your career? These, no matter what Ross is able to do with this movement or not, let's say we can achieve all goals we want, which is just simply not making it retroactive, but from here on, allowing these games to have some type of offline feature. That wouldn't affect the moderated community servers. Ross isn't arguing to keep the servers live. He's arguing to keep the game playable in some form. You see what I'm saying? So my argument is similar. Ross and I are arguing similar aspects, but at different ends of the, the rope, if you will. Yeah, I think Clone Wars, again, even though I can be an Anakin hater, because in the movies, he's just, oh my god, he's such a little brat. It's so absurd how much people protect him as a character. Anyway, in Clone Wars, he literally builds a complete new mentorship with a new character who's an alien, who doesn't have any family or friends. Ahsoka becomes a general, a successful one, literally becomes all the soldiers' favorite general. I think they liked him more than Obi-Wan in many cases. And yeah, like they did a great job with Clone Wars. I think that kind of stuff shows that you can right wrongs, in storytelling without having to just redo everything. But I don't know. The current version of Star Wars seems like it's more interested in that, if I'm being honest. No, I finally reached the end, actually. Wait. My favorite part of SKG was Pirate beating his ass. Okay. The last thing I'll say, the real last thing I'll say, because I actually have to take a piss. It's the whole pirate software stuff. Where do I stand, or where do I stand on that? Like I've talked about pirate software before, and I'll do it again. Probably not again, because I don't think they want to talk to me, or people like me, which is that people that could challenge them in some sort of way. So the first time I ever heard about pirate software, they were making tons of videos on YouTube and tons of like shorts that were getting all over the algorithm. And me, as somebody who's interested in tech stuff and even hacker stuff, was interested in that. So I started like reading, and I had this perception that this is like some like former hacker who kind of like has all these experiences. Well, then Pirate starts talking about how they were a former developer and they worked at Blizzard. And that was essentially the narrative that would continue on for months and months and months and months. And then during a live stream, I heard Pirate actually explain what the full extent of their experience was in their scenario. And it totally made me change my view of them immediately after that, which was that they actually talked about being largely an intern slash QA tester, which, by the way, I've been that as well for major companies, including BioWare and EA and Ubisoft and fucking 343 Studios and many more games I've Amazon games that I've alpha technical tested or done like close behind the scenes like feedback stuff. And you've never really heard me jerk off about it that much. Like, you hear me only mention it whenever it's relevant. And you only hear me mention it whenever it's like particular videos that are related to these games. I just found that a bit weird from Pirate Software because it's like they're bragging about something that I got without nepotism, that they got because their dad actually worked at the same company. And it's kind of just like, as somebody who's been through a lot of like life experiences where I didn't have much like privilege going for me and I had to just do things on my own. I get a little bit annoyed when I encounter people who kind of sell you this idea that they're like the everyday working man and you find out that their dad worked for Blizzard. See what I'm saying? So like that was my experience with Pirate Software, was like going through this process of like, oh, this is a cool new person who knows what they're talking about, blah blah blah, and then being like, you don't know what you're talking about. Because they even would talk about famously about their dad being the character featured in that South Park episode, then admit later on in a recant that it wasn't their dad, that actually they got that story mixed up. So you took all the credit for that story, got all the popularity from that story, and then recanted it later on. It's just like, I don't know, man. I don't know what to think about the Pirate Software stuff. Seems like a guy who just is a complete egoist, obsessed with himself, and doesn't ever want to be seen as wrong or fucking things up. And as you guys know about me, as somebody who's made mistakes on stream, literally live, I don't get it. So yeah, I don't understand it, but video games and wanting to be cool do things to people, I guess. But all right, guys, I'll talk to you later. I'm gonna hit the music, and I'm gonna go finish writing Lost Ark.